Good evening, and welcome to Chrononauts, a science fiction, sometimes literature podcast. But this month, we're talking about music for a little bit, specifically the band Hawkwind, who we have been talking about at length already. And if you want to listen to our segment on the early days of the band, that is up to 1979, where Bob Calvert kind of leaves the band. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But for the most part, he left the band. This
Yeah.
segment is going to focus on the 80s and 90s era, starting off with Levitation and ending around the Alien 4 time period, as that's when a lot of major changes again happen to the lineup, and we get into a whole nother era of the band, which we're not going to be talking about this month, but maybe later on down in the future. I don't know where our Hawk journey will take us, but it's already taken us to some pretty fun places, I have to say. I'm Nate,
Yeah.
and I'm here with JM. Gretchen is off for this month, but we will be returning to our regularly scheduled programming with Gretchen in a couple weeks when we talk about Jack Vance and Samuel Delaney and a couple other really interesting stories that I think will be a lot of fun to cover. But before we get into tonight's topic, you can find us on all the major podcasting platforms. Apple, Spotify. We post our episodes on YouTube. And we also have a blog spot where we post rare text and original translations. There's a lot of Russian and Spanish language material up there, and there's going to be a lot more going on there in the future. So definitely stay tuned. We have a lot of really cool stuff planned for you. You can follow us on Twitter at ChrononautsSF or send us an email at chrononautspodcast@gmail.com. So I guess before we get into Levitation and 80s Hawkwind, before we really get started here, I want to muse or perhaps maybe bloviate a little bit on heavy metal, specifically the new wave of British heavy metal, because it's going to be looming in the background of Levitation and more or less this entire string of 80s records. We talked about punk and glam rock and a bit on the roots of industrial in the last segment, as that turned out to be a lot more relevant than one might initially think when listening to Hawkwind. But when we were diving into the background of the band, reading all the books that have been written about them, a lot of these interesting crossovers come up in ways that I didn't expect it. And that's been another really cool part of this journey is, yeah, Hawkwind really was involved with like everybody. And it's just kind of crazy.
Yeah.
But here I want to briefly highlight the developments of heavy metal to put it in context with what Hawkwind was doing in the 80s and what, generally speaking, underground rock was like at the time in Britain. And while we talked a lot about punk in the last segment, 70s British punk lent itself a little bit more to experimentation than 80s punk did, as hardcore rapidly eclipses the initial crop of punk bands who flirted with styles like reggae and things like that. And that more experimental branch tends to split off sometime around like 1979, 1980 or so.
Yeah. The style was just beginning, I guess. I mean, there wasn't really a set idea of what you were supposed to be when you were punk, except maybe a artistic one rather than a sonic one, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that very much fits in with Hawkwind's mentality. I mean, we saw in the last segment how they more or less treated the band like a collective, which is pretty much the exact same thing that Crass did throughout their entire existence. And again, the parallels are just absolutely fascinating. But I think generally, and perhaps oversimplifying things, you can see that that experimental trend or bands that lean towards the more weird stuff kind of split off, and a lot of that's considered post-punk now, the bands that were doing that kind of stuff between like 79 and 83 or so. And kind of punk morphs into hardcore, at least the more interesting stuff in the UK at the time, like Discharge and things like that, and then turns into crust and grindcore a couple years later. But that's a little bit less relevant to Hawkwind than what heavy metal is doing in the 80s, and a little bit less relevant than when punk was doing in the 70s. So, terms and definitions of musical genres change a lot over time and can probably mean different things to different groups. I think what I'm about to say is probably not very controversial at all to metalheads, but I just want to note this at this stage, as I don't consider bands like Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple, Blue Oyster Cult, Sir Lord Baltimore, or Blue Cheer to be heavy metal, but rather hard rock. And like science fiction and how to define it, we could
Yeah.
recognize that it has a certain something.
I think that's mostly just because of the time period rather than, like, the sound itself. I mean, it just, like, those bands probably had some songs that could be classified as metal songs.
Sure.
But that was only like a small portion of what they did. I mean, look at Deep Purple. Like, they have so many different eras, and they have everything from like the soft wizard rock of the really early albums to like in rock and the funky stuff. And yeah, I would consider Highway Star a metal song.
Sure.
But it's true that a lot of rock bands in the 70s, I think, were experimenting a lot more with their sound in general and not necessarily sticking to one thing all the time. One particular sound that dominates their entire career. I mean, yeah, like you could say Black Sabbath. Everybody knows what a Black Sabbath riff sounds like, but they evolved a lot over those albums, and even like early on they were doing acoustic blues and sort of like soft ballads with flutes and so on, and those songs were, if anything, just as venerated as some of the heavier stuff. They weren't just like interludes and then some guy goofing off on an acoustic guitar and a keyboard for a minute just to fill space on the album, like you sometimes get with like
or some even flirting with noise and electroacoustic stuff like we have on Volume 4 and FX. And again, it's kind of similar to what Dick Mick might have been doing with Hawkwind in one of the live gigs or something like that. But I mean, with metal, there's definitely a certain something that differentiates it with hard rock, like science fiction differentiates itself between speculative fiction. And exactly what that is almost impossible to pin down. And I'm sure we could spend all night debating just about that particular origin point. But from where I stand, that something really starts in Black Sabbath, in that they are really the first band to do that thing as their prime musical output. So, I mean, there's tons of 60s heavy psych bands that like stumbled upon it for one song, like you mentioned, Deep Purple and Highway Star. Led Zeppelin, Communication Breakdown. You know, we see these obvious heavy songs.
Led Zeppelin has a few, for sure.
Yeah.
But I guess maybe less than Deep Purple does.
Yeah,
even.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, Led Zeppelin is definitely very, like, Lord of the Rings kind of folky, crawling in the Hobbit
blues
hole.
rock, basically, especially early on.
Yeah.
But some of that stuff's really heavy. Like...
No, definitely. But, I mean, when you take Black Sabbath's early records, especially when you get to, like, 1971 and Master of Reality, like, nobody is even remotely close.
Yeah. And we don't have to talk about Satori from Flower Traveling Band on this podcast, right?
No. I mean, that's a great record, but I mean, like...
Yeah, you're right, though. I'm just being an argumentative...
yeah.
Like, yeah. You're pretty much right, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I always say, like, that album is just as heavy as Master of Reality, but maybe not all the way through.
Yeah, and it's definitely got some weird stuff in there, and it's definitely not a very conventional record. But it's one of those few things between like 1971 and like 1976 and 1977. You know, you could point to the early Pentagram stuff, like those 7 inches that they pressed like 200 copies of. There's some stuff here and there, but for the most part, not really a lot that you could specifically point at and say this was definitively a heavy metal band with no qualifiers.
Yeah, until you get to Judas Priest, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So 1976 and 1977 is when Judas Priest comes into the picture with their classic trilogy of S albums, but also when Lemmy gets kicked out of Hawkwind and forms Motorhead, who start off playing Hawkwind songs, as according to Lemmy, he didn't know how to play any others.
Yeah.
So after some crucial lineup changes and an aborted first LP that doesn't really see the light of day until several years later, Motorhead releases the self-titled in 1977 with the 2 mega classic albums Overkill and Bomber to follow in the late 1970s. And Lemmy himself rejected the label heavy metal for Motorhead and considered themselves just a rock and roll band.
I thought of bringing those up, Motorhead, the last episode, and we just had so much stuff to talk about. And by the time we got to 1978, it was like, oh, we haven't talked about Motorhead yet. Well, and this is actually a good idea to start talking about them here because,
Yeah, I think it directly fits into what's going to come. It's as Lemmy rejected the label of heavy metal, they really defy a straightforward categorization either in metal, punk, and rock and roll, and yet are the embodiment of all three at the same time. And it's pretty amazing to hear the evolution of the Hawkwind songs through their original incarnation to On Parole, which is the aborted album that came out a couple years after it was recorded, and then to the self-titled Motorhead, with each version just kind of stripping it down further and increasing the raw primal nature of the songs.
Inside I guess it's part of the Hawkwind log, or maybe it's reproduced from live stuff from around that period, but it's inside at least one of the CD inserts. This is part of this story that I think, I'm not sure if Moorcock wrote it. It's actually mentioned in the book we were talking about so much last time, but I forget if it's Moorcock or maybe Barney Bubbles who wrote it. But it's basically talking about how the guys in the band met, but doing it in this like really weird, spacey fantasy world kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
And at one point, one of the band members is doing something, and somebody else is like, "What's that sound?" And he goes, "It is heavy metal."
Yeah.
So there you go, 1972, Hawkwind, a band that we don't really consider metal, at least not at that time, especially necessarily. Were calling themselves that because, yeah, it was a new thing. It sounded cool. It sounded like Metal Hurlant, which I'm sure is something they all knew very well.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, yeah, it was getting thrown around in the press a lot. I believe Sir Lord Baltimore was the first band to be described as heavy metal. But like I said, the meaning of these genre terms evolve over time. People were calling Hawkwind punk in 1975, Hawkwind calling themselves metal. Terms change, and that's totally fine. And it's a fascinating evolution of how we think of music, both at the time and how we think of it now. Because, like you said, I don't think very many people would consider Hawkwind to be a metal band, even if there was definite similarities in their 70s material and some even more definite similarities in their 80s material, even though I wouldn't call any of these 80s records to be metal records.
Right. Not really.
But as it relates to, I guess, Judas Priest and Motorhead, that dearth of bands between Sabbath in 1970 and that crucial turning point in 1976 and 1977 is really where the dam begins to burst. Judas Priest were on a major label. Motorhead's first album was on a smaller label, Chiswick, but Judas Priest records got out all over the place. So when they get out of the UK, they go into continental Europe, America, Japan, and all of a sudden bands begin popping up rapidly between 1978 and 1980, all over the world, more or less. By far the biggest national scene at this time in terms of both influence and size was the British scene, which is referred to as the new wave of British heavy metal. New wave meaning the bands to follow post Sabbath, Priest, and Motorhead, who I would consider the old wave. And as far as the sound of the new wave of British heavy metal scene goes, you could kind of break it up like maybe 5% influence from Black Sabbath. I mean, despite their popularity and hugeness, only a handful of bands like Witchfinder General really went for that kind of sound. Then maybe like 15% being the rough and raucous bands drawing from Motorhead influence like Venom, Warfare, Tank, Atomcraft, and so on. And a lot of the rest of the band drawing from Judas Priest and hard rock. Not to say that all new wave of British heavy metal bands are Judas Priest clones, but a lot of things that Judas Priest brought into the equation, like vocal style, guitar playing, feel for gothic mood and tone, it all seems the closest out of these big three to what the majority of new wave of British heavy metal was doing. So the movement ran strong for several years, and 1985 is usually the end cutoff date you'll see. Though another endless argument you could have on the internet is when does the new wave of British heavy metal actually start and end. And during its run, it produces hundreds, if not thousands, of bands from all over the United Kingdom, many of which release nothing more than a demo tape or a 7-inch. So while we go through these next several Hawkwind albums, more or less up to the Xenon Codex, I think, new wave of British heavy metal is going to be a major shadow lurking in the background. So to take it back to Hawkwind, last time we ended up with Bob Calvert leaving the band, and we're going to have a lot more major lineup changes. Calvert would sometimes pop back up during live gigs, but I don't believe he appears on any studio record from this point on. But here, Harvey Bainbridge comes back into the band, who played bass on one of the tracks on 25 Years On. And we get a return to the band of Hugh Lloyd Langton, who played guitar on the first album. And Tim Blake comes in the band on keyboards, who was friend with Dick Mick early on and lived in France for a while. He played in Gong under the pseudonym High Tea Moonweed, which is a pretty awesome pseudonym, and ends up leaving Gong in 1975, focusing more on his group Crystal Machine. And he also played on the Nick Turner Sphinx project and their record, I don't know, Zeton Today? I'm not entirely sure how you pronounce it. But it's a pretty cool album where Nick recorded himself playing flute in the King's Chamber of the Pyramid of Giza, and then found a bunch of musicians like Blake and a whole bunch of others to record music based around his flute lines. It's definitely not rock at all, but if you like the more ambient side of Hawkwind, I think you'll really get into it. But one day, Blake just received a phone call asking him if he wanted to join Hawkwind, and he was like, sure, saying, quote, "It was very, very simple. It was a very strange set of circumstances. Sometimes one's destiny makes itself clear, and this was one of those times." So this version of Hawkwind that we have now played at the Leeds Futurama Sci-Fi Festival, which was billed as the world's first science fiction music festival, which unfortunately doesn't have anything to do with literary science fiction, although they did show some films, namely Freaks, The Man Who Fell to Earth, The Amazing Colossal Man, The Mysterians, which is a cool-looking Japanese movie that I've never seen,
Ah, yes.
Barbarella, and The Human Satellite, though it is primarily a music fest. And to give you an idea of what the music scene was like at this point in time, here are the other bands that played on the bill that I'm familiar with. So, Public Image Limited, Joy Division, Cabaret Voltaire, Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark, The Fall, Echo and the Bunnymen, Screedy Politi, and a whole bunch of other bands I'm not familiar with, like Punishment of
What an
Luxury.
interesting lineup.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wouldn't necessarily associate all those bands with science fiction, but, like, it's just, yeah, it's an interesting snapshot of the time.
No, it definitely is, yeah. And it's cool that they were billing it explicitly as a science fiction music fest. So special guests include Robert Calvert and Nick Turner's Inner City Unit. And apparently Nick joined Hawkwind on stage to do Brainstorm, which sounds like it would have been pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Simon King doesn't last too much longer after that fest, though, and he's replaced by Ginger Baker, who is most known for his work in Cream. Though he doesn't last very long at all in the band. Apparently he was really big into heroin and would bring his heroin dealers to the shows and like a lot of...
It sounds like drinking was the big thing, though. Throwing bottles at people and stuff like that.
Yeah, Brock was just like not into it, and he tried to make it work because apparently he's a really, really talented technical drummer, as Brock said, quote, "Ginger could do with one hand, other drummers would have to do with two."
He is a really good drummer. Did you watch the Mr. Baker documentary about him?
No,
It came out a few years ago?
No, I didn't see that.
Oh, okay. It's worth a watch. It talks about him living in Africa and stuff, and like some of the problems he had, and his irascible temper. And it's kind of weird and sad a little bit seeing him. I mean, even during his time in Hawkwind, he basically, what did Brock said? He said he'd become a millionaire twice and lost it. So
Yeah.
naturally, he was kind of like a little bit obsessed with money, I guess, is what he was trying to say.
Yeah,
So-
I mean, those Cream songs were pretty big hits and pretty early, so it must have been a good 12, 13 years before this. I'd have to check the date on when those albums came out, but I think they were like, what, 67, 68, something like that?
Yeah, 67, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was also in Blind Faith and a number of other bands in the 70s. And in the 90s, he joined the pretty cool US band Masters of Reality for an album, which, contrary to their name, do not sound like a Black Sabbath tribute band at all.
Yeah.
They're actually really cool. It's funny because, you know, you can always tell a stoner rock band by the band
sure.
name, right? If it's like Orchid or Sleep or Electric Wizard, or we know what you are, right? It's Masters of Reality sounds very blatant, but they're actually not at all just a Sabbath wannabe kind of band. Not that I dislike those other bands I mentioned. I actually enjoy them all, especially Electric Wizard. But yeah,
Yeah. No, it's good stuff for sure. And Ginger is definitely a guy who gets around. And you know, nothing but respect for people like that who can play in a billion different bands and do it all well. But him having a volatile personality was not a unique thing to this lineup of the band, as Tim Blake also had a very volatile personality and was prone to these extremely dramatic blow-ups all the time. So it's a shame that this lineup didn't do more together, as I really, really like this album.
Yeah.
Levitation was digitally recorded, the first time they'd ever used digital equipment, between July and August of 1980, and was released on October 17th, 2 weeks before Motorhead releases Ace of Spades on November 1st.
Yeah, it's a funny contrast because it's so much like shinier and stuff sounding than Ace of Spades is. But yeah.
Yeah, it really is.
I mean, the two bands are obviously very different at this point, but it is a funny contrast when you think about it. The two albums came out so close together. Right?
No, for sure, yeah. And to drive home the point of the specter of Motorhead and new wave of British heavy metal being in the background, Levitation only charted at number 21 on the UK albums chart. So, in comparison, I want to talk briefly about what else charted in 1980 for a minute, namely the big 1980 new wave of British heavy metal bands unrelated to the Hawkwind Motorhead cycle. So, Tigers of Pantang, Wildcat, charted at number 18. Def Leppard, On Through the Night, charted at number 15. Saxon had 2 records that year, Strong Armor of the Law, which charted at number 11, and Wheels of Steel, charting at number 5. And of course, the very, very classic debut from Iron Maiden, charted at number 4.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing when you think about it. Like, it's quite a awakening to realize just how popular this stuff was at that time.
Yeah.
Even On Through the Night, like, I always kind of thought of On Through the Night as the Def Leppard album that they don't know about it, the band doesn't want to talk about it. The forgotten first album of the band, but it's really not that forgotten. I mean, it did pretty well at the time, and it's like people bought that album.
Yeah, it's a great album. It's definitely my favorite record.
Oh, it's definitely my favorite too, but that's because I don't really like them. So my favorite from them is like the one that just sounds like a new wave of British heavy metal album, right? It's just like, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, these are all new bands aside from Saxon. Those are all debut albums, and they're all pretty good. I mean, Tigers of Pantang would get better with their next one, but Wildcat's not bad. And from the old bands, Judas Priest releases British Steel, which charts at number 4, and Black Sabbath, now with Dio fronting the band, released Heaven and Hell, which hit number 9. So there's tons more 1980 new wave of British heavy metal albums out there that did not chart or charted a bit lower than Levitation, but I'm naming all these classics to illustrate a point in that heavy metal is here, and it's here in a big way. And I can't help but feel that fact is really rubbing off on the band in this era, even if at this stage the guys in the band might not actively be listening to a lot of it, though.
Yeah, and it's really funny because I want to say like Hugh Lloyd Langdon being in the band seems to heavy them up, but I don't think that's the case. It doesn't seem like he was that kind of influence, like, or that kind of player necessarily. I guess, yeah, like you said, it was just in the times. It was in the studio maybe they were using. It was in like, I don't know. This album came out that way. Weird thing is though, this is one of the first ones that I bought, and I had to listen to it in a little bit before we decided we were going to do this. I don't know how long it had been. Not that long, but like, I don't know. I guess when you get to listen to so much music, and like sometimes albums just end up getting a little bit buried. And
yeah.
It's just not something that I'd listened to for a while, even though I always thought it was good. For some reason, I always remember the title track being faster than it actually is. And the album comes on, and I'm like, oh, okay, it's just that tempo. Okay, cool. It's weird. That's I always remember it going along at quite a clip, but it's a pretty sort of standard, like, Hawkwind tempo. But instantly you notice the drums. This is a very drum-heavy album, and I don't know if it's because they're so happy to have Ginger Baker in the band or what, but, like, the drums don't sound like they do on any other album. Like, they're just so in your face. Like, every bass drum hit is just really, really, again, it's probably, maybe it's just the CD master I have or something like that, but it's just, it's a lot. I don't mind it because Ginger Baker is really good, but I kind of feel like, I don't know, I don't think that the album would have been worse if Simon King was on it, to be honest with you.
Yeah. I'd imagine they appreciated his technical ability, which probably made things easier when they were touring endlessly.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I really like how it all came together. I really like how everything sounds. I really like Tim Blake's playing on the synth.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, this one feels a little bit less glammy and new wavy than the last 4. Parts of it feel more like a heavy Floyd or maybe even some of the techier prog.
I think the fact that Langton is back in the band, I mean, they're not really a lead guitar band, are they, usually? Like,
yeah, not to this point anyway, but I think Hugh definitely changes that a bit in the dynamic, for sure.
And you listen to Dust of Time, which is one of my favorite songs on the album, right? And it has this, like, lead break in it. And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, like, I could picture that on Iron Maiden album or something like that. Like, not even from 1980, maybe a later album like Power Slave or something like that. Of course, you know, you could also call it Thin Lizzy or something like that, because people say they're the originators of that, like, particular style of having 2 guitars and kind of having them, like, harmonize a lead part and stuff like that. And it sounds like, I don't know if Brock is playing some of that too. There's definitely some overdubbing going on, but it's cool. I mean, why not? Why shouldn't Hawkwind take advantage of the studio?
No, absolutely, yeah.
The lead sounds so majestic, and the synths are really good. Again, I do think, like, obviously, all respect to Dick Mick and Del Mar of the early days, but, like, ever since, I don't know, I mean, Simon House obviously really took the band in a new direction with his synth stuff, but also the synth work on Hawklords and now here is, like, kind of next level, in my opinion. Like, it's way more melodic and orchestrated, but also, like, playful. House did some of that, too. We were talking about Reefer Madness earlier and how it goes from the cool, tinkling, banging piano chords to like these crazy, weird synth noises and stuff like that. And it's like, the guy's getting high, right? Like, the noises are getting weirder and like. And here you have all kinds of synth soundscapes and swirly sounds. You mentioned the heavy metal being in the shadow, and I can definitely see that, but I feel like Hawkwind is still pretty influential at this time. Not on heavy metal necessarily, but on like bands like Ozric Tentacles.
Absolutely, yeah.
For example.
Yeah.
And they really followed in the footsteps of Hawkwind because in the 80s and 90s, they were playing free festivals and stuff like that. And apparently they would just play for hours and hours, and people would come and go. And a lot of them would be high, some of them wouldn't, but they'd just be like vibing on the music. And they wouldn't need to stop. They'd just keep going, keep going. They'd have no singer or frontman. If a guy wants to leave the stage for a while, no problem, right? Just keep playing, right?
Yeah.
They're a band that's always released music independently, never signed to a major label, and apparently they sell like 1 million copies of their albums, mostly in the UK, right? But also elsewhere. They really seem like a band that's following in the footsteps of Hawkwind with especially the kind of synth that you start to hear from now on. Other Tentacles and bands like that, I guess they have more like shredding kind of guitar parts every now and then, whatnot. But the electronics, there's the lush, spacey synth soundscapes and stuff like that is something they may have picked up from Hawkwind. I'm sure those guys were in the audience at a lot of those Stonehenge and Glastonbury shows and whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely. And this does feel very much in line with that, jammier, heavy Floyd. And it's a really interesting contrast to the first album, the last time we saw Hugh. And that this album feels like really, really tight and focused, even though it does go off into these like jammy parts that wouldn't feel out of place on an Ozric Tentacles album. Whereas the first album, it's cool, but it's like a little bit unfocused. It's kind of all over the place. And this just feels so tight, and the band is like very, very together here. And all its players, Ginger's obviously very technical, and Tim Blake's synth is awesome. And yeah, Hugh's guitar playing definitely brings out a different sheen to the band. Yeah, it works really well here, I think.
Yeah. And the album does sound really good. Like it's probably one of the best productions that they have.
Yeah.
Right. The drums are curious to me. They're just so like they really, really brought them out, and the mix is weird and highlighting them. Like they're very dry sounding and upfront. It's just like wow. Right. They really want to show off the fact that he doesn't have a long extended drum solo on the album, but
no, I'm sure he did it live though.
Before we got into doing this, I always kind of thought, oh, it's so weird that Ginger Baker joined Hawkwind, right? And I'm kind of thinking to myself, those guys couldn't have got along, right? That I was thinking, it seems like not only they're from different generations, but I don't know, it just seems Ginger Baker and Cream comes from a whole different ethos of rock and roll. And even though, yeah, they both got their start in like the blues, Dave Brock was doing a lot of blues stuff early on too. Cream never went in for theatrics or anything like that. Three guys. We don't have to talk about what an asshole Eric Clapton is. He's not really one of my favorite guitarists either.
Yeah, I honestly never really got into Cream, to be honest with you. But
yeah, well, I mean, I like some of their songs a lot.
Yeah,
I still kind of enjoy a lot of their hit songs, some of their other songs. It's good, but Jack Bruce had a really cool voice, and Ginger Baker was a really good drummer, right? So Jack Bruce was also the bass player. He sang, Clapton sang. But yeah, in terms of Yardbird guitarists, I would put Jimmy Page and Jeff Beck certainly in higher rank.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, for sure.
Songwriters and musicians.
Yep.
But anyway, but point being, he seemed to come from a whole different milieu. Basically, yeah, I mean, he did some other stuff in the 70s and was basically going from band to band. And when he joined Hawkwind, the guys thought, he's all right. He was basically suggested to them because they had a falling out with Simon King. And Hugh Lloyd Langen's wife, Marion, was actually the press secretary for Ginger Baker, maybe the company that he was associated with or something like that. So she had to deal with him a lot, and she was the one that actually suggested that they should get him on board. So they did, and with Ginger Baker came his own management team, and over this business, Hawkwind's management quit. So Marion Langton basically became the manager of Hawkwind at that point, and she had to liaise with Ginger Baker's management. And Baker was like, really crazy by the sound of it. When they were on tour, I think it was a Hammersmith Odeon show, and Ginger would do this really long drum solo in the middle of Brainstorm. And the rest of the guys were like, well, it keeps him happy, and we can go off to the side and do whatever for a while and then come back. And there was one day where it just seemed to be going on forever and ever and ever, and Harvey Bainbridge just was like, I wish she'd end. And so then he thought he heard one of the triggers. Oh, he's going back into the main rhythm. It's time to start the song up again. And he's like, I hear it. I'm going to get it. And he jumps up and he starts playing his bass. And, well, Ginger Baker wasn't ready. And apparently he had this absolutely horrified expression on his face. And the rest of the band fell about laughing. And after that, Ginger Baker hated Harvey Bainbridge. And the bad blood started to come out. Maybe not because of that incident in particular, but there were other things that were going on the tour. So basically the recording went great. But the tour, they started to see problems early on. One day he got really drunk and fell in the shower and cut up his back and all this stuff. And the whole time apparently before then, they thought he'd been joking around, when he was standing on the table, waving a bottle around and telling his dog to bite people and throwing stuff at people and stuff. They thought he was just having a lark.
Right.
Now they're like, oh, actually, he's really messed up. And
yeah, it would be a kind of running theme here where they record an album and it goes well, and then on tour, egos flare and people get too drunk or get too into dope and bad stuff happens. And people split in these really dramatic ways. So,
and what I was getting at was, which really comes down to, I guess, the difference I would see in them even before I read up on all this stuff. But so Ginger Baker, partway through the tour for this album, went to the other guys and he's like, I think we should fire all the lighting people and all the extra crew. And he's like, they're not necessary, and if we did that, we could all get more money, right? And everybody was looking at each other, not sure what to say. And somebody, I think it might have been Bainbridge again, was like, that's nonsense. It's part of the whole thing of Hawkwind is the spectacle and all this stuff. And we're not going to fire those people. They're cool and they're important. And things started to go downhill pretty much after that.
Yeah, he was only in the band for a couple months, so he didn't really last very long.
Yeah. And that's just it, right? In a way, I get Ginger's perspective, because he's probably that's not very rock and roll. What is all this extra stuff? It's just spectacle. Why do we need this? And he just doesn't come from that kind of mindset, right?
Yeah. I will note that I did not make note of the musicians who, circled in between albums and only appeared on live stuff for the various chaotic periods. Just because, as you said in the last episode, sometimes keeping track of who's actually in Hawkwind can be a daunting task. But yeah, Ginger doesn't last long, and we'll talk about who comes in on Sonic Attack when we get there. But yeah, this is an album where the band goes really well together. I mean, I love the title track. It's this heavy and intense Hawkwind song. Motorway City feels like a callback to Suffragette City, but that's just the name.
Although to be honest, I love the late 70s stuff, so it doesn't really feel like they're coming back from anything.
Yeah.
Except maybe the fact that PXR5 is sort of a disjointed, hodgepodgey kind of album, but everybody knew that, the band knew that. It's not if anything, to me, the only slightly lower point to this point was Astounding Sounds, Amazing Music, and even that album was still pretty cool. But we're going to hit some lower points soon enough, I think.
Yeah, I think I like this one more than the last 4 albums, though. Again, I like those last 4 albums, too. But yeah, this album I will
That's
put
fair.
Up yeah.
I don't necessarily. I do think it's on an equal footing with the better ones, probably, yeah.
Yeah.
I think I just really like the Bob Calvert fronted stuff. I really enjoy the Hawkwind Lords album now. I didn't really listen to that one too much before, and now I enjoy that a lot. And I always enjoyed Quark.
Yeah. Yeah.
To me, this, it's a different sound, and it's just as valid. I do like it a lot. Yeah, and it's one of the first I heard from the band, too, so.
Yeah, a lot of awesome stuff in here. World of Tears has this really great heavy guitar riff that really jumps out at you. Who's Gonna Win the War might be my favorite track off the album. It's got this really dark and moody, powerful chorus. Space Chase is a really fun ride, and gives me the same feeling that instrumental track off the first Traveler record, Conumized.
Yeah.
Gives me the impression of being in some early 1980s video game in the same way that Traveler track does.
Yeah, even though it's not that shreddy, but it kind of reminds me of some of the 80s guitar instrumental stuff too.
Totally, yeah.
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 Maybe like even Joe Satriani or something like that. Like it doesn't exactly sound like that, but even like the way the synth is played, like is a lot more technical, like you said earlier. It's a
Yeah.
lot more, like,
No, it's a really, really fun ride. And it's cool that they did a little nod to the fifth second of Forever, though it's just in the name. The vibe definitely feels much closer to the classic era, even though it's a little slicker with a more 80s prog and AOR production. So, yeah, I really, really like this one. It's probably my favorite out of all the records we're going to be talking about tonight, though I do.
oh, we blew our load so early. Again, even worse than last time.
Yeah. But it's not to say I dislike the records coming out because I like them a fair amount.
Yeah, this is definitely one of the better ones. Yeah, I don't know if it's the best, and it might be. Yeah, we're about to hit a spell of albums that I definitely like less than anything we've talked about so far.
Yeah.
Not through the entire discography henceforth, but definitely the next few. Spoiler alert. Yeah, I don't rate any of them that highly, really.
Yeah.
But some of them are pretty cool. So
Yeah. So the next one up is Sonic Attack, which again is a
this one is my favorite of those three.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I don't know, it's an interesting album. So like we said, Ginger Baker's out of the band, and I think they cycled through a couple drummers before they decided on Martin Griffin, who had previously drummed on 25 Years On, and was apparently really stoked to play at Stonehenge, as he didn't last long enough in the band the first time around to get to do that, which is kind of charming. They also headlined Glastonbury that year with New Order, and the set ended up in disaster. Apparently, New Order played for way too long, and they caused Hawkwind to go on late. And they had this like elaborate stage show plan with lasers and fireworks and a giant pyramid that they built on stage, but they had to cut their set early due to the curfew and the fact that they
That's
started
really
late.
Yeah, I've seen shows that went like that, but none that had the elaborate stage show that Hawkwind did. That must have been worse than ever, right?
Yeah, so the Hawkwind fans were pissed off, and they more or less started rioting, smashing the stage and the equipment. And Hawkwind, thus, were never invited back to Glastonbury. But as this four-piece, they record Sonic Attack from June to August of 1981, and it gets released on October 2nd. At this point, they're also able to bring Moorcock back into the fold, who contributes vocals to Coded Languages. And yeah, it's interesting that you like this one more than Levitation. I felt this one was a little bit more of a mixed bag. There's some stuff on here that's truly awesome, but some stuff that just like really doesn't work for me. To me, it doesn't really feel that cohesive, just like kind of a bunch of pieces randomly pasted together, which I think more or less that's what it was.
Yeah, I don't know. I just like the vibe of this one. I like the fact that there's some pretty heavy stuff on this album. Angels of Death, I really like that song a lot. I think that's just such a great song. And I heard some live versions of that I really liked as well. And the version here is good. It's kind of weird that it starts with Sonic Attack, but I kind of like the way they do it. Like, they add all kinds of noise to it. Like, it's obviously a studio thing instead of a live thing. And it really does sound, like, overwhelming and, like, pouting and stuff like that. It's just, like, it does sound like a Sonic Attack on your district.
Yeah, no, it's an awesome way to open the album. And it's just a classic track to begin with. But it's a major tonal shift when it goes into the second track, Rocky Paths, which is another one of these, like, really poppy, new wavy songs that reminded me of like a Spacier Devo or Dow Jones
in
the Industrial. Oh, I like it too, but it's just going from Sonic Attack into that song. It just kind of feels like a little awkward.
Okay, that's fair. I don't know. I always really like Devo, and I don't mind Hawkwind doing this. It's kind of like what they were aiming at occasionally with the Calvert-led stuff. But I agree that there's more electronic kind of stuff going on here, but still a pretty heavy sound. Living on a Knife Edge, that's a really cool song.
Yeah, that's one of the ones that I wasn't a super big fan of. It's a little punkier, but in a 70s British punk way that I'm just like not the biggest fan of. I don't know, that one just like never landed for me. But the one I really do like is Virgin of the World.
Yeah.
Which is like really, really cool synth heavy track with this like chanting. It's like really awesome. Streets of Fear I really like, another dark and moody heavy track.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah. This one I hadn't listened to in a while. There's a lot of these albums, I had listened to them a bit back in the day, but not much. And this was one that I kind of written off, and this one was better than I remembered. Whereas the next couple are not really as good as I thought they might be, a little bit. Anyway, this one I like more, though. So, I don't know. Again, a lot of this stuff is like what kind of mood you're in when you listen to it, right? And sometimes you're just not, like it doesn't click, right? And a couple of these albums, I thought I would like them a little more than I did. maybe a couple of them I like them more than I thought I would. So this is one I vibe with. So I thought it was good. But yeah, it's not as good as Levitation.
Yeah, I mean, generally
Right.
speaking, I think I like all these records except for one or two, and those don't come for way later. Like all these 80s records, I think are at least like a 7.5, 8 out of 10 for me.
Cool.
Even though they're not like masterpieces like the 70s stuff, yeah, I still really, really enjoyed them on
Yeah.
the whole.
That's cool. Yeah. I think there might be a couple that I would rate lower than that, but to me that's still pretty decent. Like this one maybe I would give a 7 out of 10, which is still pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you think that the band is like, what, 9 albums into their career at this point, and they've reinvented their sound so many times, and
Yeah.
musical trends have come and gone.
And these 3 albums are released in very short order.
They are,
right?
yeah.
So
Yeah.
it does feel like maybe there's some rushing going on at this point a little bit. Like just kind of feeling like they have to get an album out every year, and maybe it's time to slow down. It's just kind of the feeling that I'm getting.
Yeah, though it is an interesting time for the band because from Sonic Attack to Choose Your Masks, the lineup is stable. So nobody leaves the band in dramatic ways.
Right, and so they capitalize on
Yeah,
that, obviously.
right. Which is smart because it doesn't sound like it happens very often with the band.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
Which I guess leads us into our next one, which is Church of Hawkwind. And again, no light up changes, so no tour drama with people leaving the band in dramatic ways or anything like that.
Yeah.
There's a few guests. Moorcock's not on this album, though there was a pretty ridiculous incident on tour with Moorcock when they toured off Sonic Attack.
Yeah, and this is where maybe the Hawkwind ship needs more drama because this is my least favorite so far.
Yeah.
Absolutely, this album. I tried again today because I'm like I'm really missing something with this album, and I don't know.
Yeah, it's probably my least favorite too. But yeah, the incident on tour when they toured for Sonic Attack with Moorcock. What happened was him and Calvert showed up to perform at the same time, and apparently Moorcock and Calvert hated each other. There was some drama regarding Moorcock's ex-wife Jill. Apparently, she had fallen for Calvert in a way that
That's not good.
Moorcock, just wasn't into. So they got
Yeah.
on this altercation on stage, which Brock describes as, quote, Michael was about to come on and do a poem, and I looked across the stage to give him a cue. Michael and Bob had their hands at each other's throats. The curtain at the side of the stage was bulging with a struggle. More and more people were rushing around to stop this scene.
Man, oh man.
So, Moorcock wouldn't be away for the band for very long, though, as we'll see shortly.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I gotta say, like, I don't think Moorcock is anywhere near the performer that Calvert is, but
No.
I do think he was probably a lot easier to work with.
Yeah,
right?
sounds it.
It's just like, yeah.
I don't know, just the image of like these two like strangling each other behind the curtain, and you can see like a struggle.
There's trouble.
Yeah. But yeah, Church of Hawkwind released May 14th, 1982. I agree, this is probably my least favorite out of all the 80s ones. It's a much more instrumental, jammy type one, which in some ways it does sound pretty cool. I do like a lot of these synth bits. It makes it stick out a lot more from the other albums in this era.
Yeah, there's a lot more electronics here,
Yeah,
right?
it definitely is, yeah.
I mean, I gotta say this, like, I'm not against electronic music. I mean, if you wanted, I could say, even though I delved into some odd corners and didn't really go too deep, I was into electronic music before I was that into metal and stuff like that. But I like Hawkwind when they're not quite like this. I think, too, we're in the period where there's a lot of people taking advantage of synthesizers and drum machines and stuff like that for the first time. And sometimes I feel like the limitations of the technology at the time also limits the music, and it's like the band members didn't really realize this, or they were too excited by the new technology, right?
Yeah.
So there's not just Hawkwind, but a lot of things in general. Like, I think this basically killed soul music dead. Like, you listen to something like, I don't know, the album Control from Janet Jackson or something like that came out in like the mid-80s, and it's just like, what is this? Like, this is supposed to be soul? There's no soul in this record at all. It sounds like a machine. Like,
Yeah.
it's not right.
Yeah, it does sound a lot more polished, especially compared to how they use electronics in the early days. I mean, Dick Mick was basically playing his oscillator with his soul, you know what I mean? Like, you can't really do that with a Roland drum machine, even if they make cool
Yeah.
noises. It's just a different approach to playing the instrument and putting
Right.
these weird sounds.
I can understand why Dave Brock wanted to go this way.
Yeah.
And I think it's cool that he tried. And I think that later on, they make really good use of technology and get some really awesome synth like soundscapes, and they have done before. But I think we're just at the point now where like it's becoming a part of pop music, and more people are using this technology and trying to see what they can do with it. And sometimes it's like, I think that was probably more fun to make than to listen to. And there's so many, like Hawkwind have always had spoken word parts, but here it's all like weird news clips and stuff like that.
Yeah, I don't like the JFK thing at all. Like, that's probably my least favorite track out of anything.
But it's on a few of the tracks, right?
Yeah, I don't know. The RFK assassination samples on Some People Never Die. It's just, that whole bit, like, I just don't like it. It does very much sound like Brock playing with a whole new set of tools. And that's more or less what it is this is more or less a Brock solo album, as he wrote the vast majority of the record. I think Bainbridge wrote only a little bit of it here and there, though the full band is playing it. It's pretty much Brock just playing with samplers and synthesizers and sequencers and that kind of stuff. And some of it doesn't work. I just really don't like Some People Never Die. But there is some cool stuff on it. Some of it does feel like retreads. Experiment with Destiny, like, I don't know why they brought back Virgin of the World, especially when it's just like from the last record.
Yeah.
Angel Voices and Nuclear Drive, I think, is a really cool opener, though.
Sentinel is good.
Yeah.
I like that one.
Yeah.
I think they should have ended the album with that, maybe even. Because the album feels really long, too. That's another thing.
It does, yeah. Looking to the Future is a pretty cool closer, I think, though.
Sure.
Fall of Earth City, I do like. It's another one of those, like, spoken things. It's more or less like a literary experiment. We get this, like, narrated science fiction story. And it's kind of neat.
Oh, yeah.
So, I don't know, there's some good stuff here, but yeah, a lot of it, well, I wouldn't say a lot of it, but some of it just really doesn't work for me. And it's definitely not their best. It feels like Dave Brock just playing with new technology and not really knowing where to go with it.
Yeah, pretty much exactly. Some every now and then there's a cool, you can tell they're starting to use the sequencers and stuff like that. And every now and then it's like, oh, that's a cool set of notes, and the way that sounds with the synth is pretty neat. But I don't know, the fascination doesn't last that long, I find. So it's just kind of like,
Yep. They do better, including the next one, which is Choose Your Masques.
Yeah.
This one, again, same guys in the band, no lineup changes. Moorcock, again, is contributing stuff. He contributes Arrival in Utopia, which is a really awesome song, but he's credited as just Steele, as apparently he was in a financial dispute with Douglas Smith. But the royalties for him were enormous off this record, apparently, to the point where he was like shocked at how big the check was. During the recording sessions, which were from between June and July of 1984, they were really strained with Martin, and the band was getting more into electronic music and drum machine sequencers, I guess more Brock than anybody else. But Martin was just really not into it, so he left the band after the album. And they persuaded him to come back temporarily for the tour, which he reluctantly agreed to, but quit after the tour finished up, and that was his final time with the band. So this was, recorded early summer of 1982, released October 29th of 1982. Definitely better than the last one, more of a return to form.
I remember liking this one more from previously, because I had listened to this one a bit.
Yeah.
This one fell a little bit for me. I did like it still, but I'm not sure. It's not one of my favorites from the 80s, but I do like it a fair bit, I think. I think my main problem with it is, it rocks a little more, but now we're getting this, like, bad side of 80s rock production coming in, where it's like these really ridiculous sounding drums, and the guitar kind of sounds like mush. Like, I don't know, it's unfortunate, but I mean, while in the 80s there was the metal underground, there was also the mainstream metal started to appear, and the mainstream kind of hard rock of the time, which was pushing a very specific sort of sound.
Absolutely.
And, I mean, we're a little early for hair metal still, but like...
This is very AOR at times. Like, those huge AOR anthemic choruses, I think, are all over this album, and the ones coming
out. Like after Mob Rules, right? Black Sabbath had horrible production for like a long time. They lost Martin Birch, who... I wonder what a Martin Birch produced Hawkwind album would have been like. Yeah. But they lost him in the 80s, and then it's like Born Again, which it sounds like a Venom record or something. It's so badly produced. And then you get like Seventh Star, where Glenn Hughes sounds like he's singing from the end of a tunnel in like the middle of nowhere. And then you get Headless Cross, which would be amazing, except the drums don't even sound real, and everything, it doesn't matter how much you turn the volume up, it just never sounds heavy enough.
Yeah.
They're good albums, don't get me wrong.
Yeah, I like them too. Yeah.
And then this Hawkwind has a bit of a stat starting to go on here. Like, it sounds, I don't know, it just sounds like mush. And I just feel like the riffs sometimes are really cool. They don't stand out enough. My version does have, as a good test of this, is like the re-recording of Psychedelic Warlords, Disappear in Smoke. And it's like, oh, I kind of like hearing this song in the 80s, but somehow I feel like the riff needs more kick. Like, there's just something, like, it wants to be really heavy, because it's like, hey, we're in the 80s now, we can do this song even heavier than we did in 1974, but it doesn't feel like that. It's just missing that aspect. I don't know, yeah. But the title track I really like a lot,
totally.
Along with the mysterious speech at the end. The tube is ready.
Yeah, it's got this cool, like, punkish riff. I don't know if you've ever listened to that band Skunks. They have this one song, Gimme Some, which, again, it's like way more basic and primitive than the riff they're playing here, but it's like the first thing that came to mind for me. It's that kind of like 70s US Killed by Death style punk.
I'm not familiar with that, I don't think.
Yeah, it's a cool track.
Cool. We're getting a lot of side things going on with these podcasts, and I still have to send you the link to that Sam Gopal record, because that's I was going to do that. Yeah.
I mean, Hawkwind touches a lot of things here, but yeah, obviously Hawkwind uses more electronics and spacier keyboards and reverb vocals.
Arrival in Utopia is really good. I like that one a lot.
Yeah, I like Arrival in Utopia a lot. Yeah. Dreamworker has these really cool, like, bleepy synth noises that I don't know. I just really like that kind of like randomish stuff that comes in.
Yeah, not the greatest.
Void City, I think, is an interesting track. It almost sounds like a combination between Kraftwerk and Neu with the vocoder and this like repetitive driving rhythm.
Yeah, and definitely there have been krautrock reminiscences on some of the past albums.
Sure,
especially starting with like You Shouldn't Do That and In Search of Space and Ovo Loca and We're in the Edge of Time, and now we get this kind of stuff, which is like, yeah, okay. They're probably aware of Kraftwerk like everybody else seemed to have been at that time, and like, what's going on and over what happened over there in Germany. It doesn't seem to be too many accounts of them meeting up with those guys, but obviously they knew Amon Duel too, because there was a couple of member exchanges and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, Amon Duel's Five seem to be pretty known and big with the English scene. There's a good clip of them playing Soap Shop Rock on YouTube. And you can very, very visibly see David Gilmour in the audience smoking a joint and enjoying them.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But another one on this album that I really like is the ode to the classic novel, Fahrenheit 451, which I'm not sure if we're going to do on Chrononauts, maybe, but I definitely want to cover Bradbury at some point.
Do Bradbury. I don't love that book, but it's pretty well written, as most of his stuff is.
Yeah.
That is actually an older song. That dates back from the Calvert era. I think that they never did a studio version up till that point. Just another example of how, they have all these songs in the can, and like some of them end up as bonus tracks. Some of them end up as later studio versions from years down the road, stuff like that. Fahrenheit 451, I believe, is one of those.
That's a cool song, and I'm glad they brought it back for this. Yeah, Bradbury is really cool. Definitely want to cover him on the podcast at some point. Talking briefly about the Latin American translations at the beginning, taking a look at that Mexican, I don't know, it's halfway between a prozine and pulp magazine, Los Cuentos Fantásticos, or Fantastic Tales. By far, the author that appears in there the most is translations of Bradbury's stuff. So getting very out there in the 50s, and just really interesting body of work. But yeah, so Waiting for Tomorrow, it's an awesome closer. Sounds like a really Hawkwind-ified version of 80s new wave or British heavy metal, or even US heavy metal track. Silver Machine re-recording. I don't think it's really necessary, but I don't know. It's a good song. It's not really my favorite Hawkwind song, but I don't mind it here.
Not the bands either, so
it's
just weird. I guess just a song everybody knew. So
and I guess it never had been on a full length at this point, maybe, or no?
No, it hadn't been.
Yeah. Okay.
So
I guess another one of those where they bring back the old 7-inch and live favorites for the record.
Yeah, no, of course, one album that a lot of people had was the Roadhawks compilation.
Right,
And
right.
that was actually done in the I think after Warrior, I guess. Maybe 1976, 77. And that one had Silver Machine and I think possibly Urban
Yeah, I think it's
Gorilla?
Urban
Maybe not
Gorilla
that.
and some live stuff too. Yeah, they have a billion compilation albums that bring some of that stuff on LP, but trying to track all that stuff down and keep track of all that stuff would be a whole
Yeah,
nother podcast segment in and of itself, I think.
yeah. Yeah, that's not our job.
Yeah. But you do have appendixes in the books, the one that we talked about last time, which is the Hawkwind Days of the Underground,
Yeah.
Radical Escapism in the Age of Paranoia by Joe Banks. But that only goes up to Levitation, so the text that I use for the bulk of the information on the 80s era and beyond is the Saga of Hawkwind by Clerk, which was published in 2009 and goes up to that time. So if you're looking to get into
Yeah,
depth about that era, definitely check out that book.
and that one's a lot of it is quotes from the band members, like really just telling their sides of the stories. Not a lot of editorializing.
No, there's not. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I guess there is kind of with the specific angles. Like, it does seem like some of the dramatic incidents are played up a little bit because they're fun and interesting, I guess. But, yeah.
Yeah. It's
Yeah,
definitely
yeah.
a different approach than the Joe Banks book and is more similar to the This is Hawkwind, Do Not Panic book that Kris Tait wrote. Though Carol's
Yeah.
definitely a better writer than Kris
Look at
is.
how many drugs we do.
Yeah.
How much acid was at this gig? A lot.
But yeah, it's kind of laid out in that same style where it's more or less just a bunch of interview segments strung together with a couple sentences. And that has its ups and its downs because you really do hear the band tell the story in their own words. But, unlike the Joe Banks book, you don't get a lot of that context of what was going
No.
on in the outside world or just kind of sociological phenomenons with music
Right,
and some
right.
of the
Which
other
is a
people.
really interesting angle to talk about them from, right?
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
I kind of feel like this is sort of like a trilogy of albums after Levitation in between that and the next one.
Yep.
Yeah, I feel like maybe it's a low point a little bit, but there's certainly highlights from this era.
Yeah.
It still has its moments. I like certain songs from Sonic Attack a lot, and some songs from Choose Your Masques are really good. So, yeah, I don't know. It's still pretty good. I wouldn't go out of my way to get these, maybe.
Yeah, I like them. Again, they're not the best, but I think if you like the band that are open to this era, I think you'll have a good time for the most part. Certainly not bad albums, for sure.
Yeah. The next album I like a lot more.
So, after the tour for Choose Your Mask, this central stable core of the band was the three-piece of Brock, Bainbridge, and Hugh, and they cycled through a billion temporary drummers. Tragedy strikes for Brock in January of 1983 when his wife Sylvia commits suicide, and in the spring that year, the band is dropped from RCA. Other record labels were releasing these various compilation and live albums, and there was a bunch of legal threats being thrown around with Calvert. Nick Turner is on again, off again in the band, and out of the band for various periods, but they're able to do the Earth Ritual tour in 1984 with him. Lemmy comes out as well, and Brock even does a few shows with Nick as the Sonic Assassins.
Yeah, was this the show where Nick's clothes fell off?
It might have been.
And apparently Hugh Lloyd Langton was very upset about this. Nick trolled him the next day by wearing a thong with a banana attached to it. And he's like, but I wasn't naked. And Hugh was going, but you were taking the piss out of me with that banana.
Yeah.
It's like, I think you're going a bit bananas there yourself. And he said, but I eventually covered the offending penis, and that's all that Hugh was worried about. Nick Turner.
Yeah, a lot of personalities in the band, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's after these shows where Bainbridge wants to quit. They get him to stay by moving him to synth, though, which he really ends up liking. Brock remarries a woman named Kris Tait, who becomes more involved in the business end of the band.
Yeah, she was already going on tour and stuff like that with the band, too. She was there when Ginger Baker was there and stuff. Yeah, so she'd been around the band for a few years already at this point.
Yeah, but now she's definitely more directly involved with the behind-the-scenes stuff, and she even writes that book, Do Not Panic, which we've referenced a bunch of times before, including in the previous segment. So, for the next one, the band wants to do a concept album focusing on Elric of Melniboné. I've never read those books. How about you?
Melniboné.
Melniboné.
I think so, anyway. Melniboné.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Have you read those books? I haven't read any of them.
I've only read 2 of the Elric books. Basically, I've read a bunch of Moorcock, but like I was saying last episode, I've never actually finished one of the complete series, except I think maybe Runestaff, because it was a short trilogy of pretty small books. I believe I did finish that, and that is certainly tied in with the Eternal Champion stuff and the album that we're about to discuss. Although it does seem to mostly focus on Elric, there is other manifestations of the Eternal Champion that are described, like Needlegun seems to be like more of a Jerry Cornelius, because that's like the future incarnation, or the contemporary one, I guess. That's like not set in a strange fantasy world or the past or anything like that.
Right.
Different iterations across different times and places, basically. So it does seem like Chronicle of the Black Sword is trying to be a bit far-reaching, and it does seem like the band is able to express its best science fiction adjacent concepts when they're associated with either Moorcock or Calvert or both. So here we have Moorcock coming back and really, well, I guess he was on some of the last few ones as well, but
yeah,
this one he's really involved a lot in the concept.
Definitely. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
And yeah, the egos flare up with Nick, and he's out of the band, I think pretty much for good at this point. And the bass and the drums position are again unstable for a bit. But Brock asks an Alan Davey to play bass for them at Stonehenge in 1984, who played in the new wave of British heavy metal band Gunslinger. And Brock asked Davey if he knows any drummers, and he had met Danny Thompson Jr. through the local scene, who he recommends. Danny Thompson Jr. is the son of a very accomplished musician, Danny Thompson Sr., who played bass on hundreds of records, including records by Pentangle, Donovan, and Rod Stewart, among many, 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 many others. For Danny Thompson Jr., though, he's big into new wave of British heavy metal, and he played in a band called Traitor's Gate. Now, this one is a bit tough to pin down, as there's at least 6 different new wave of British heavy metal bands called Traitor's Gate.
Yeah, which one is it? I've heard one recently, actually, and it does seem it's pretty good.
So from what I believe, it's the band from Suffolk or Ipswich around that area who never actually released anything. So if the band you heard was the Welsh band who did Devil Takes the High Road, it's not the same band.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the band he was in never released anything, and they just gigged locally to whatever pubs were in the area. But again, information is a little bit sparse on that band, so I'm not really 100% sure on that. But the Devil Takes the High Road band are from Wales, so I don't think it was that band. Black Sword would be Thompson Jr.'s first studio credit, and he was 22 when the album was recorded, so quite younger than the rest of the band at this point. So the additions of 2 new wave of British heavy metal guys on bass and drums, I think, makes this one in sound probably their most metalish album, though I really wouldn't call it a metal album, but you could definitely hear the influence on it.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily a metal album. I think it rocks pretty well, better than anything, at least since Levitation, but it does have a more, like, it sounds very 80s.
Yeah.
But, again, it's not, I don't know, the production is still a little shiny and kind of, maybe it could sound a little fiercer or raw or something, but I really like the sound a lot. I think it's their most solid album in quite a while. Next to Levitation, it's the best of the 80s, in my opinion.
I agree, yeah.
Some days, I don't know, I might even like this on an equal plane with Levitation, because I just think the songs are really strong. They're really, really catchy. It's weird because at first I kind of was underwhelmed. I think, I don't know, I was kind of, maybe I was expecting it to be heavier. Maybe I was like, kind of, I'm not sure, I was expecting something different, I think. Well, once I kind of opened myself to thinking, okay, it's like, although it's got a lot of really, really cool synth stuff, at its core, a lot of it is like this simple 80s hard rock record.
Yeah.
And instead of singing about, I mean, they're still kind of singing about getting laid, but it's like fantasy stuff, so it's different, right? It's sword and sorcery. So the songs are just, really catchy. Still not wild about the way the drums sound, but the bass is good and loud, so it gives them a nice bottom end. Vocal melodies are cool. Sea King is awesome.
Yeah, I like Sea King a lot. Yeah. Yeah, Needle Gun's really a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's so catchy.
Yeah.
It's gonna make you run. Needle, 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 go. There is a live bonus track on my version.
Is that Voice Inside My Head, is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it is. Okay, that song has that's a really, really crunchy metal riff right there.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah, Horn of Destiny, I think the riff is kind of similar to this one band, French band Speed Queen. They have a song called Les Maudits. Pretty cool track. Yeah, I really like this album too. It didn't really do well for the band though, so charted only at number 65 in the UK, which is their lowest position on the chart since the self-titled, which is definitely unfortunate.
Yeah, because they deserve to do all right with this album. I mean, maybe it's not as good as some of the classics, but it's up there for me. I mean, and I do think the synth pieces are really good. There's the Shade Gate, right, which has a lot of really awesome, just the tone. They're starting to make really good use of that 80s sound on here. And Zerazinia has vocals, but it's like this kind of beautiful ambient sounding synth ballad kind of.
Yeah, I like that one a lot.
Really nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, Sleep with 1,000 Tears, that's a really awesome song too. I think the synths are used a little differently on this album. They're like more percussive, a little more rhythmic, not quite so like there's not as many like synth solos and stuff like that as there are on Levitation. The year before this album came out, a certain song called Jump by Van Halen came out. And some of the synths do remind me a little bit of that on this.
Yeah, I could definitely see it, yeah.
But I really like that song, so I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
It's a fun song from the 80s. I don't know, I came to enjoy those records a lot in the last several years. I don't mind Hawkwind maybe taking a little bit from that playbook, right?
No, definitely not. And yeah, it works really well on this album, and the stage show is pretty awesome too.
Yes.
As they took an all Elric thing with fancy armor and swords and choreographed fights on the road. And this is another one of the things where they poured all the money they made into the stage show, and the band members themselves didn't really make much money from the tour. But they did release a video for it, which is also called Chronicle of the Black Sword. And that is one of the Hammersmith Odeon performances. It's a little bit different than the live album they did from this tour called Live Chronicles, which is sourced from both the shows.
It's a really good live album for sure.
Yeah.
There are a couple of older songs on it, but it mostly does concentrate on the album.
Yeah.
The Black Sword. Yeah.
There's some differences between the two, and there's some songs that are on the live album that aren't on the video, and some songs on the video that aren't on the live album. So I guess if you want the full experience, you can get both. But yeah, the video version is really cool. Elric is played by some guy named Tony Crerar, who's in this like really black metal looking makeup and on stage the entire time, just like wielding and swinging around a sword and making like faces at you. But awesome. Tons of other dancers too, including Kris Tait. Moorcock comes out and reads a bunch of stuff, and yeah, definitely a really fun time. I had a lot of fun watching it. Certainly want to check out more of their live stuff, and according to the band, it sounds like a really positive time on tour without any issues or major drama. So,
right, and good for them, right?
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, this was a really good one, and again, no major big blow-ups on tour. So going into the next album, Xenon Codex, we have the same people recording the album, though the recording sessions of this album would strain the band and would cause Hugh to want to leave the band after the album is recorded. And slightly after the album is done, Danny Thompson just randomly, promptly leaves the band after a benefit show for the endangered black rhino, just tired of all of Dave's ego, and just drives home without even telling the rest of the band.
Yeah.
So,
right.
This one comes 3 years later in 1988. It's not as strong as the previous one, but there's still like some really awesome things on this album, I think.
Yeah, this one has a cool vibe to it. I don't know. It's kind of more in the background to me a little bit. Like, not as bad as Church of Hawkwind, definitely. I don't know. It's hard for me to really pick out standouts. Yeah, so the first song is really awesome. The War I Survive.
Yeah.
I have a live version of that too, and that's cool.
Yeah, the live version that is on the bonus for Chronicle of the Black Sword.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
Yep.
Mutation Zone. That's a cool one. Sword of the East, I like.
Yeah, I like Sword of the East a lot.
Yeah. I don't know. It's weird. Like, the album feels, like, laid back, but occasionally they still go for these kind of heavy, chunky parts that work pretty well. I think maybe I don't know. I'm maybe feeling why Hugh is getting annoyed a little bit, because it doesn't seem like they're utilizing the two guitar thing as much now. And maybe, I don't know, maybe he was getting a little bored or something like that. And it also sometimes seems like the personality didn't quite match up. Like, they were talking about him being really moralistic and stuff like that. Like, it's like, I don't know. You gotta think some of the stuff she puts in the Hawkwind Saga book with a grain of salt.
You definitely do,
I guess, but
yeah. Yeah, I mean, it does feel pretty light and airy in comparison to Black Sword in that very 80s AOR way. Apparently, they just rushed in 3 weeks for the recording time, and the band themselves really weren't that happy with it.
Yeah.
But didn't really chart that well either at number 79, so the band's definitely slipping in their position there, which, I don't know, it's kind of sad to see, but at the same time, they've been going for 20 years at this point, so.
The music industry, like, the turnover is really quick.
Yeah.
With the popular stuff, and I guess they were commenting around Levitation on how journalists were basically calling them old farts, and everybody thought they were, like, the critics, if they even liked them to begin with, which most of them didn't, thought they were definitely, like, washed up by now, right? Yeah. And it's like, they felt like they had a lot to prove. They had to prove that they could still rock, and even though they were older guys, like, they still had it in them and stuff. And I think they were doing a pretty good job, but they are starting to get really into the ambient stuff, or maybe Brock mostly is.
Yeah, and I don't know, I don't think it's a bad thing at all. I think that it's cool that they start to experiment with styles and embrace new technologies and not just try to rehash the glory days on every single album.
No, I agree with that, yeah.
Even though, it doesn't work all the time, and that's totally fine. It's cool that they're a band that just doesn't stay still and do the same thing over and over and over again. Because I think that's when those old legacy bands really do stagnate.
Yeah, and they always do kind of maintain this, like, hypnotic quality to their sound. Like, it is still Hawkwind, and now that they have access to all these machines, they can really make this, like, a big wall of sound and stuff like that sometimes, which they could do before, but only with the right combination of people and the right vibe and everything like that. And it seems like, with so many personalities in the band, eventually somebody's going to have to dominate and really take charge. And Brock was the guy in there in the beginning. I guess it's right that it should be him. And now he's doing a lot of stuff. He's not just playing guitar, sometimes singing, but he's also doing a lot of the keyboards as well and stuff like that, right? Like, if they're using a drum machine, he's probably programming it. Mm-hmm. They do definitely play around with drum machines at certain points, although they do always have the live drummer and everything.
And it starts to come in more on the next couple albums, too, especially when we see the further shifting of mainstream music into techno, when that starts to launch off in the UK scene. And I mean, at this point, rock is still pretty big on the charts, even though punk and metal have rapidly evolved since 1980. So, I mean, by 1988, when this record comes out, the extreme metal underground is in full swing, where you have hundreds of, like, first wave death and black metal demos from all over the globe.
Yeah. And I'm sure that Hawkwind were not aware of any of that.
Although probably not. Yeah.
It is really funny to think that on the debut of the British, I don't know what to call them, I guess they're kind of progressive metal, avant-garde metal, I don't know, the band Means of Asphodel. Hugh Lloyd Langdon actually appears on their debut album, but they had some demos out.
Yeah.
Not too long after this. Kind of a weird thing. They did a cover of Assault and Battery. It's kind of funny because they like growl vocals the entire time, and it sounds kind of weird. But I'm not against those. Obviously, we're both into like some heavy death grind and shit like that. But Like, just hearing that is not always why, like, an Iron Maiden tribute album and half the bands are growling out the lyrics to, like, The Trooper and stuff like that. It's just like, I don't know.
Yeah. It is kind of interesting that John Peel has also been through this whole Saga musical evolution too. We talked about very briefly in the last segment of how they played on his show really, really early on. And John Peel was also the guy who broke Tangerine Dream to
Yeah.
UK audiences.
And meanwhile, Carcass was on his show.
Yeah, Carcass, Napalm Death in 1987,
Yeah.
Unseen Terror. Pretty much the biggest bands in the underground that were playing this crazy music that you'd hear on the BBC due to John Peel. And that's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
But just the speed that the underground, both metal and punk, evolved throughout the 80s. I'm sure for some music journalists, it feels like bands like Hawkwind are being rapidly left in the dust doing their thing.
Yeah.
While, music goes in so many different directions, taken up the torch by people probably now half their age, as the band has been active for roughly 20 years at this point.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is this era of the band, which I don't know, I think it's really cool. I really like these two records, Chronicle of the Black Sword and Xenon Codex. Probably more than anything else from the 80s aside from Levitation.
Yeah. Well, I definitely agree. Yeah, Chronicle of the Black Sword especially, but even the Xenon Codex, I've always had a bit of a soft spot for that one. And I did hear that one pretty early on, but it was one that I also hadn't listened to for a really long time.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it, yeah. It just, I don't know, it's hard to feel like anything really stands out from the record, but it's got a vibe that just works altogether, right? I don't know. Maybe it's just because I haven't had the kind of experiences I've had with, like, Doremi, Fa Sol La Ti Do and stuff like that, where I really feel like it's a journey that ebbs and flows, and I can pick out the highlights and how I feel about different moments on the album and stuff like that. Xenon Codex just sort of floats around, and you kind of feel it, and it's this sort of lightweight album, but at the same time, not exactly. I don't know. Still got some cool guitar things going on and stuff, so yeah.
Yeah, it's cool. I think if you approach it with an open mind and you're open to that kind of sound, you'll find it a pretty rewarding listen.
Yeah. Next album, I also have a soft spot for that one. I think I might like more than you, actually, but we'll see.
No, I do like the next album. The next album is pretty cool. So,
Okay.
Yeah, Hugh's out of the band now, and they have Simon House come in, who previously did synth on Hall and Warrior, as well as violin on that High Tide Sea Shanties album.
He's also on all the Calvert albums.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
he's been with the band for off and on.
Astounding Sound, amazing music. And
Yeah, but he's coming in to do violin in place of Hugh's guitar for the tours. And Richard Chadwick comes in on drums, who previously made his living, quote, shoveling shit for the rich in some form or one another. He played in a band called the Demented Stoats, which had Bridget Wishart singing for it. And the singer of his other band, Smart Pills, was friends with Kris Tait, so the connection was made through that link. Bridget was also an art teacher, and she played with the Agents of Chaos with Brock, and her band, the Hippie Slags, joined Hawkwind on stage at Nottingham Rock City. So Bridget sung various songs for Hawkwind as a guest and becomes a permanent member as vocalist in 1990, around the same time that Simon House leaves. And this lineup produces Space Bandits, recording the album between April and June of 1990, getting a release on September 24 of 1990, produced by Paul Cobbold. And the following tour was really hard on Bridget, who faced a lot of sexism on tour, a lot of people didn't really accept her as a Hawkwind singer because she's a woman, and she leaves the band shortly afterwards, which also Harvey Bainbridge left the band shortly after the tour. Yeah, it is unfortunate.
And they did do a North American tour for this album.
Yeah, and they shot a video for it too.
I was telling you this story before, but my old band, back in the really early days, we played a lot of shows with this group called Bruiser Brody.
Yeah.
They had a bit of a wrestler shtick going on, and their frontman was a pretty cool guy. The first time we met, he was actually wearing a Hawkwind Space Bandits shirt, and he talked about seeing them on this tour, which is where he got the shirt. So they did a cover of Master of the Universe most nights. They changed the lyrics to be about wrestling or something, but it was cool. No synthesizer or anything like that. Just three rock and roll punk guys just motoring on, right? And they were good. They were good. Don't know what happened to those guys, but hey, Bruiser Brody members, if you're listening, send us a comment on the podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, but
yeah, this album's cool though. Definitely synth heavy. I mean, so I guess not like the Bruiser Brody recording of it, but yeah, a lot of electronic stuff on this record. And if that Days of the Underground book covered this bar, I would expect them to do around this time a whole chapter on how the UK techno scene emerged. As here's where we start to get a little bit of those synth and like drum patterns that you might hear on, you know, like an Orbital record or Aphex Twin or something like that. Those aren't like the earliest mainstream examples.
But I feel like this album has a better drum sound than a lot of the previous ones.
Yeah.
The percussion is a lot better done. It sounds, I mean, it's probably electronically assisted in a lot of ways, but it sounds more natural. I like the percussiveness of this album. I think it really works. I don't think her vocals stand out at all. And I think that's maybe also unfortunate because it's like, she's the new mouthpiece of Hawkwind, right?
Yeah.
She's like, I can't really say that her vocals are very memorable, I guess.
No, she's not the greatest singer. She's not really the worst either, but a bit nondescript, I guess. She works for the band. I think she's good on these songs, but I don't think there's any point on this album where I'm like, yeah, this singer's awesome.
Yeah, that's good. What do you think of Blackout Speaks?
So that was one that I didn't really know what to make of at first. It seemed a little bit out of place, but just thinking about it and listening to it more, I do like its inclusion here. And I do like that Brock and the band are being aware of these, I guess, cultural issues that they're still trying to keep politically active.
Sure. And also, Blackout Speaks seems like something that Robert Calvert would have liked.
Yeah.
Approved of. This was the first album that came out after he had died, I guess, too. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah. But they would do, on the next one, too, there's a couple tracks where they comment on political issues and protest movements and things like that. And I really like its inclusion here, even though it does seem like a little bit out of place on the record. It's cool they made space for it, I think.
Yeah.
I really like the opener to the album. It's just like
Images.
Yeah, it's just such a fun anthemic AOR type track.
That's a good one.
Yeah. TV Suicide almost sounds like something you might hear on an EBM record with how the synth and the drum machine patterns are. So it's kind of like all over the place on this record. Again, a lot synth heavy, less rock and rolly with like the guitar solos and stuff like that Hugh brought to the band. Definitely a different side of the band, but I think it works. Like, I do like this album a fair amount.
Cool, yeah. I thought from our comments earlier that maybe you didn't like this one very much, but I definitely like this one. I have a hard time with some of this. There's only a few albums to go. And I don't know. These albums to me are a little difficult. I don't necessarily feel like listening to them that much, but they're interesting. And this is one of the better ones, I think, for sure.
So this is actually not my favorite 90s record. You might, well, maybe you could guess what my favorite 90s record is, but I'll tell you when we get there. But
I think I have a favorite 90s too, but I don't think it's, we'll get there.
Yeah. I don't know, this is around like a 7.5 for me. It's a good listen. It's not my favorite, but there's nothing here that really rubs me the wrong way, I don't think.
Yeah. Unlike even like Church of Hawkwind or some of the ones to come, this album is not very long. So it feels like it's, a pleasant experience all the way through, and it's not like dragging or anything like that.
Which is a good segue to Electric Tepee.
Yeah.
So the band is back to a three-piece of Brock, Allen, and Chadwick, which is the lineup on the recorded album, no guest or anything like that. And it's definitely the 90s now. They start using drum machines and computer software like Cubase for the electronics, which was the band's first experience using computers and software. The band continues to work with producer Paul Cobald. I keep wanting to call him Cobald. That's probably wrong because he's not like a D&D monster, right? It's probably like Cobalt or something like that. I didn't actually look up how to say it. But they recorded at Brock's personal studio, which was a milking shed on a Devon farmhouse that he converted into a recording environment. So this is also the first time that they've recorded an album outside of a professional studio environment.
Yeah, nice.
One of the political issues that they get into a bit of hot water here is the single Right to Decide, the promo single which came out before the album. And one of the lyrics was about a man named Albert Dryden who shot and killed a town planner who was planning on bulldozing his bungalow. So I guess they showed up with bulldozers and Dryden just like shoots the guy a whole bunch of times in the head.
Yeah.
Dryden gets 2 life sentences, one for killing the guy he killed and the other for shooting and wounding both a cop and a BBC reporter who happened to be there. Hawkwind had lyrics that referenced the incident, and Dryden's family got incredibly offended, and the press accused the band of trying to cash in on the tragedy, so they had to cut the offending lyrics for the version that made it onto the record. Wow. And yeah, the 90s are definitely here in some negative elements too, because this is where the compact disc really comes in as the dominant format for mainstream recorded music. And it's really, I think, impressive at how quickly vinyl gets killed off right around this time, which is like 1991, 1992. Everybody is doing CDs now, and vinyl is like a specialty thing if it's released at all. There were a lot of mainstream bands that released albums on CD only during this time. Metal quickly adopted the CD format, and again, a lot of the major metal releases from the 90s only were released on CD and didn't see a vinyl release until later when vinyl made a bit of a comeback. So, as such, the CD, I believe the original CD format can hold 74 minutes, and some of the expanded ones that they introduced later could do 80.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly when the 80-minute or 79 and change standard became the thing, but I think it was pretty quickly after the advent of the CD.
Yeah, I'd have to look it up, but either way, it's over 70 minutes for both formats. And this, in my opinion anyway, introduced a lot of bad ideas to music production in general of what our concept of an album should be. I really, really, really like the LP for a physical format because a good LP is like 45 minutes in length. It's not too long. It's not too short. The really good albums, it leaves you wanting more, but the mediocre ones, it doesn't really overstay its welcome.
Yeah. You know, I think you make a really good point, and I've always kind of contested a little bit just because there's a YouTube channel I often watch, a music YouTube channel called Sea of Tranquility, and on that channel they talk a fair bit about stuff like this, and yeah, they say, especially when Martin Popoff is a guest on the shows there, talk about how the CD format basically expanded the length of the album. They always say, and other people I've seen elsewhere always say, like, you know what, it made the albums too long, and I wish they hadn't included all that stuff. But I also think to myself, how do you as a band, I mean, alright, ideally, you think that your album has no filler on it, right? You think that everything that you do is as important as everything else. Maybe, if you're a pop band, you get convinced that the singles are more important than all the other songs. But for the most part, you're adding tracks to a record, and you think, like, well, we're going to include as much from the recording session that we think is good as we can.
Yeah.
I kind of get both sides of this. I don't 100% feel like the CD format it was unfortunate in that respect. Because I kind of feel like, yeah, if bands want to do a 79-minute album, it's cool because now they don't have to put in extra money to make a double album and all this stuff, right? It's like,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's I see both sides,
Yeah.
right? That's it. I also think, maybe it is a point that some of these albums are too long. They're too long because maybe I'm just not as into. Let's say Doremi had extended versions of all the songs. Would I mind if they were longer? Would more soloing and brainstorm make me feel awesome? I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah, I don't know. The full space ritual with all the tracks is something like 100 minutes, and it's just such a
that's a double album. There are LPs out there that are 3, or even I think Chicago had several 4 LP albums. I don't think Hawkwind quite got there.
Yeah, there's a lot of mainstream rock albums during this era that are on CD, and I don't know. I'm not sure it's necessary for a lot of those like alternative rock one-hit wonders to do 75-minute albums. Like, there's some double albums I really, really like.
I don't know though. So an album I really like from that era. We're getting off track here, but an album I really like that I liked when I was younger, that I stopped listening to for a long time, but which I enjoy again now, is Super Unknown from Soundgarden.
Yeah.
And that album is 70-odd minutes long.
Yeah.
I feel like there's not really a track I would get rid of. Maybe like the really short 1.5-minute track, but like other than that, there really isn't. It's an album I feel deserves its length, but
yeah, I do like those Soundgarden albums a lot, actually.
I think maybe they were like a rare case, right? Like, yeah. Oftentimes maybe it is too much. I don't know. Plus, people feel now like they don't have time to listen to an album, right? Like it's unfortunate, and it's not something that I approve of. But people are like, "You want me to sit down and listen to a whole album?" Meanwhile, here we are listening to like 20 of them. But
yeah, and on the I guess other side of the equation, Taylor Swift has like each of her albums are like 40 songs long, and they're like 3 LPs and all that. So I guess there are people out there who do prefer much, much longer albums, but I'd say for the most part, a lot of my favorite albums are not double albums. Space Ritual is like kind of a major exception. I like Double Nickels on the Dime a lot.
Lamb Lies Down on Broadway you were talking about.
Yeah, Lamb Lies Down on Broadway is great.
Yeah,
Double Nickels on the Dime I really, really like, but I don't know. I'd kind of have to rack my brain to think of others that I'm really into. Yeah, this one is too long.
Yeah, this one I was a little shocked at how much I didn't really get into this album. I thought I would like it a lot more. I'm not sure why. I think because I remembered liking it, and I don't know. It's just this, again, the big wall of sound, but it's mostly synthesizer, it feels like LSD. It's kind of cool. It's interesting noise, but I don't know. It's just, I feel like they're kind of going for something as heavy as like the really classic sound, which I respect and I think is cool. But it's just not really what I listen to them for, I guess, right?
Yeah. I don't know. I do like the opening tracks, LSD and Blue Shift. I think they're really cool, actually. Secret Agent is the one on here that I just like really don't like. I don't know if you've ever seen My Cousin Vinny, but there's a song that they play over the ending credits that is this like rock and roll song that basically just runs through the plot of the movie you just watched. It reminds me of like that song in the melody, or like maybe even like the Saved by the Bell theme song. I don't know. It's like really, really goofy. And again, it goes on for like almost 9 minutes. It's like, why is this song as long as it is?
Yeah, I do think it's kind of funny how like when they do a 13-minute track on In Search of Space, we're all like, oh, that's great, keep going, right? But now it's the 90s, they try and do a 9-minute song, and we're like, please do something else, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's it's funny, but it makes sense as well, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. Mask of the Morning's cool. And yeah, some of the other stuff's not bad, but definitely not one of my favorite Hawkwind albums.
No. I think, again, it's one of those things where I like the idea of it, but am I ever going to, like, just sit down? And I've tried probably for the reason that I feel like it's eluding me a little bit, where I'm like, do I sit down and listen to Electric Tepee? I don't know. There's some cool soundscapes on here. It's weird, but one of my favorite tracks is the most un-Hawkwind sounding title, Going to Hawaii. Like, is that a Beach Boys song?
Yeah.
But it's actually really good. It's actually, there's really awesome synth stuff. It's a little bit percussive. It's like, yeah, they're making really creative use of the synth, and I like it a lot. It's just like, it's just so weird because, yeah, it's the most un-Hawkwind sounding title. I guess Hawaii is cool. I'd like to go to Hawaii myself.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's just... Right. Right to Decide is actually a pretty cool track.
It is, yeah. Yeah.
It's weird that the family noticed that and got upset, like, back then. Apparently, the Jeffrey Dahmer family just got aware of the Dahmer album by Macabre after the TV show came out not that long ago about him. And now, I guess, I don't know, it was a thing. As far as I know, though, it's, you know, I mean, the album's already been out for 25
30 years at
right?
this point, right? Yeah.
Yeah, 25 years or something.
Yeah.
It's just like, they're not going to do anything about it, but now in the days of the internet, people know this stuff right away, right?
Sure,
so
yeah.
It's just weird that they were jumping on that immediately and be like, no, you can't do this song. You're cashing in on something horrible, and we love our son. We're not going to allow you to do this.
Yeah, I think the press caught wind of it, and they just ran with it. You know, this old, out-of-touch band is trying to maintain their relevance by cashing in on this story that was probably pretty shocking. I mean, the guy, it wasn't like a self-defense thing at all. He just like straight up shot this guy a whole bunch of times, like after he was dead.
Yeah, it's a bit excessive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, generally speaking, not my favorite Hawkwind album. 1992 charts at position number 53, so they're still maintaining some kind of relevance and financial success, and are able to keep the machine going, which is pretty cool.
Pretty admirable. It definitely seems like they were doing all right.
Yeah, and this lineup is stable again. So the next album from 1993, Business of the Future, has the same people on it. That is Brock, Alan Davey, and Richard Chadwick. They're getting more and more involved in the electronics and the new tech on this album, with minimal touring compared to previous albums. They did this one also in the milking shed at the farmhouse with Paul Cobbold. And interesting story is that they met Samantha Fox and got along pretty well with her. Apparently she liked smoking weed and hanging out with all the farm animals on Dave's farm, so she got along well with the band. I don't know if you ever heard her song Giving Me a Hard Time, which is directly plagiarized from Raven's Hard Ride, which is pretty funny. I heard that, I think it was King Fowley asked her about it, and she said that she had no idea, and that it was some like label exec who wrote the song. But yeah, a really weird coincidence.
Wow.
But with Samantha Fox and Hawkwind, they recorded a cover of the Rolling Stones' Gimme Shelter that I just like really wasn't into on this record.
Yeah.
I don't know. Aside from that and this like weird The Camera That Could Lie reggae type track.
I really like that track.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It wasn't really my favorite.
I think it's the original version I've heard from it was the live version from the Business Trip live record. And I think that's actually better. But I do like that song quite a bit. You could say, like, oh, it's just this crappy white boy reggae or something like that. But at the same time, I feel like they do have some legitimacy. Like, the Days of the Underground book talks about how they hung out in the Ladbroke Grove scene in the early 70s and late 60s, and how, like, there were a very large number of Caribbean immigrants that were, like, around there at that time, and they were probably exposed to a lot of that kind of music from an early period, right? Compared to, like, all right, so one thing that was really big in the 90s was that, like, really, really bad dance hall reggae.
Yeah.
Actually, this is really, really funny. Bit of a digression, but I guess that's the name of the game with these episodes. Do you not remember the show Murder, She Wrote?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I never watched that show, right? So there was a song that was really popular around 1993, 92, called Murder, She Wrote, and it was a really crappy dance hall reggae song. And I assumed that it was the theme song to the show, because I never watched the show. And I'm like, yeah, it's some kind of mystery show, right? And I was like this nice old white lady, right? And she's like, you know, it's a mystery writer, right? So, like, I never paid attention to the lyrics, because it's like the usual thing with that kind of music where it's like a million miles an hour with lyrics that you can't understand. And it's just like, the only thing I could understand was the chorus saying, you know, murder, she wrote.
Yeah.
And then so I looked up the lyrics, and it's this, like, totally misogynistic, like, nothing to do with the show at all. And I'm just like, oh, okay. So it's not the theme song. I think I was just thinking, like, Cops was really popular at that time, and it had a reggae theme song, so why not?
Yeah.
But I like the, original reggae music. I like some of the dub stuff, like The Scientist is awesome, right? I like that stuff. So to me, it feels kind of genuine, and it turns into a hard rock song in the last quarter, right? So I don't know. It's good. I like it. I like this album more than Electric Tepee, personally.
Yeah, I do too. Yeah.
Okay.
I think for the most part, I do like this album. It leans a lot harder into the ambient techno thing. I don't know if you've listened to too much Klaus Schulze solo records, but around... Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, usually they don't have a lot of percussion. Well, some of them do, I guess.
Yeah, once he starts getting into the 90s, like those 90s Klaus Schulze records, they start to sound a lot like some of the stuff on here, which is definitely the first thing it reminded me of.
Yeah, and I'm not really into those. I really like picture music.
Oh, those are great.
Stuff like that, but some of the other ones I'm not, even some of the 70s one is like, I don't know. I listened to Cyborg once and it was pretty cool, but I don't think I'll listen to it again that soon. It's just like...
Yeah, I don't know. I really like all of his 70s records. I think they're all really awesome. I mean, I like a fair amount of the 80s and 90s stuff too. One album I really do like is the final album that he released before his death, Deus Arrakis. It's just like a really, really awesome album.
Yeah.
But yeah, this definitely has that same kind of vibe as the 90s Schultz stuff, especially the songs about Palestine and Tibet. I think it's really cool. I can really get into that sound.
Spaces There, Palestine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting track. Interesting title. Yeah. They're, again, trying to get a little bit like... I feel like, and again, it's really funny because when they were younger, right? Like I guess they were associated with the counterculture scene around their area at that time. But they never really wrote political lyrics. Like they were always kind of like this weird fantasy drug kind of band, right?
Yeah.
Science fiction and all that. Now it's the 90s and they're older and they seem to be trying to engage more with that kind of stuff and like contemporary culture and stuff. Although I guess in a way I might be wrong because like we didn't mention this in the first episode just because it was so much, but they actually got us some trouble with the song Urban Gorilla, right?
They did. Yeah. Right.
And they decided to withdraw the single and all this stuff. And later on, Brock says, yeah, we shouldn't have withdrawn it. Why did we do that? We were pussies. Like, this is like,
Yeah.
They always had this punk spirit, I guess, and now, I guess maybe, I don't know. Dave Brock lives on a farm now, apparently, outside Exeter or something like that.
Yeah.
And he feels free to comment on this kind of stuff now, so I guess why not, right?
Yeah.
It works. I enjoy this one. But yeah, the live record they released from a tour after this, I have. And I enjoy that one, I think, even more than the studio album. Not just The Camera That Could Lie.
Yeah, I definitely do want to check out more of the live stuff. I mean, there's so much.
Yeah, if we were really talking about the live albums too, we'd be here for even more hours, right? So there's just so many.
But I mean, it adds another dimension to the band. I mean, just watching the Elric video last night, there's a track that they play during that set that's not on any of the studio records. And I'm sure with all the live records from all the various eras, a lot of those tracks do creep out. And yeah, some of them are pretty awesome. And it's cool that the band does that kind of stuff. They have all these tracks that are, I don't know, part of the mythos that don't necessarily make it onto the record.
And you know
that's pretty cool.
Right. And none of the live albums from the respective eras, unless I guess that's the object of the tour, which I guess it might be at certain points, like they did the Space Ritual Anniversary or something like that.
Yeah.
But like generally they don't dwell on nostalgia. You don't get an album that has Brainstorm and D-Rider and Silver Machine and like that they just don't do that, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting when they play the classic songs on that Elric live album, like Master of the Universe, Brainstorm, and Born to Go. They're almost like unrecognizable. They're more done up in a much faster, more 80s style. And it's just cool to have like Hugh's guitar playing on those tracks. And yeah, it's just a different spin on the songs. Because if I wanted to hear them played like Space Ritual, I guess I just listen to Space Ritual, right? You know, so what's the point of like rehashing the same thing over and over again when you as a band are trying different things with your sound? You know, it makes sense to update the songs and kind of fit them into that mold. And I think that's pretty cool because the band keeps evolving based on not only their musical journeys, but, you know, also who is in the band. they work with a lot of different personalities who all have
Yeah.
different approaches to their instruments.
That makes a huge difference, I think,
Yeah.
that a lot of people now miss out on, because I don't know if you've noticed this, but like I do kind of pay attention to younger, newer music commentaries on like YouTube and various places, right? And sometimes other websites on the internet. And I kind of noticed what I think is a pattern in that people are a lot less aware now of things like who's playing in the band.
Right.
Maybe because they can't look at the CD inserts, the album inserts or whatever. Although some online stuff will give you access to all that stuff, but you actually make a conscious decision to go find it and look at it.
Right, right.
And it's like, most people don't. So, people will be going through an entire discography of a band, and not once will they know, well, maybe the reason that their sound totally changes is that they had a different guitarist on that album. So that's why it doesn't sound like the other albums, right? And just not pointing that out seems really missing out on an important part of the commentary, right? It's like, there's a reason for all this stuff to happen, and one of the reasons Hawkwind changed so much, I guess, even though Brock was always the main guy, more or less, the captain of the ship, was that the lineup was always shifting, right? So different people brought in different influences as they came and went. Now, we've had Richard Chadwick there for a long time, but quite a few different synth players, occasional second guitarists.
Sure.
Just like...
And it's almost like people try out for the band by playing in their live shows whenever they play. And if it works, they play on the album and maybe other stuff. And if it doesn't, they just kind of drop off.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, I do like this one more than Electric Tepee. Not my favorite, but again, it's pretty cool overall.
Yeah.
I think the Stones cover and the camera that could lie could possibly work better in other contexts, but I think in the flow of this album, it kind of just like, not really ruins, but kind of disrupts the vibe, like with the tonal shift and all that. But yeah, I don't know. Definitely not bad overall.
Yeah, I think these 90s ones have a neat quirk to them.
Yeah.
I enjoy them. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's just a couple more, I guess, to get through here, so.
Yep. So I guess the next one is White Zone. Nick Turner's Hawkwind starts touring America around this time, and Brock starts lawsuits in 1994. White Zone is released under the name Psychedelic Warriors on June 20th of 1995. And this one, out of all the records, leans hardest into the ambient techno. It's all instrumental aside from some vocal samples.
So I missed this album, actually.
Oh, you didn't listen to this one?
I didn't listen to this album. I missed this album.
Okay.
I think it was because I thought it was released under a different name, and even though I included the Hawklords album when we were going through the discography, and I said, okay, these are the ones we should listen to.
Yeah.
I don't think that one was on the list, and I just kind of passed it by. But I heard about it a bunch afterwards, and I'm like, well, yeah, maybe I should listen to this one. But I didn't end up listening to it.
Yeah, so I really, really like this one. This is my favorite out of the 90s records, I think.
Oh, really?
It might be an unconventional pick because it is all instrumental and, again, leans really into that ambient techno 90s Klaus Schulze.
Okay.
Not quite Aphex Twin level, but that kind of mood. And I just really like that sound. Not a lot is going to jump out at you just due to the nature of the music and the genre. And if you're not into the sound, you probably won't like this one that much.
Well, I do like Aphex Twin. I like Square Pusher. I like Montalban, like the stuff that was released around this time, right?
Yeah, it's not quite the EDM thing with the crazy drum patterns or whatever. It's definitely more kind of relaxed and almost pure moodsy. I don't know. It's cool. I mean, you'll know what I mean if you listen to it. And it's one of those things that you'll either like or you won't. But yeah, it doesn't really sound like too much else the band has done. Even their previous ambient techno stuff, they kind of kept at not really a minimum, but they molded it around a rock context. And there's really nothing on this record that you could call rock.
Yeah, well, maybe this is what they need to do. I do want to listen to this.
Yeah, definitely check it out. But the next one after this doesn't come that much longer. So Alien 4 gets released in October 30th of 1995, just a little over 4 months after White Zone comes out. So Ron Tree joins the band. He's got a really, really big heroin problem, and he sees the band as kind of a positive outlet for him to stay off of dope so he can tour. So joining Hawkwind to stay off drugs is probably an ironic twist of fate here.
Yeah. Well, they did say they helped a lot of people or tried to help them stay off certain drugs.
Yeah.
Simon King and his heroin habit, apparently. Dave Brock's like that we were really trying to help him, but yeah, eventually we couldn't. There's only so much we could do, right? Yeah, I don't know. Alien 4.
Yeah, this one, I don't know. It's okay. It's a bit uneven for me. Again, way too long.
Okay.
Intro feels kind of X-Files-ish, but I do like the song Alien I Am.
Yeah, I love that song.
Yeah.
I think this is a good album. I like this album. Again, I'm not going to say, like, maybe it's not as good. Again, we're following a pattern here that's all too common, where we have to be like, yeah, it's not as good as the classics, but hey, it's pretty good, right? Like, it's kind of sad when you have to say that over and over again about a band, right? And it's not like Hawkwind is the only one, but it happens. I don't know. I thought, personally, though, to me, this album is kind of strong. I like the ambience on the album. See what you mean about the X-Files. That was the X-Files time. And like we've been saying, since Calvert and Moorcock are not involved, it seems like they do struggle a little bit to find that science fiction voice. Like, yeah. They're not quite hitting bullseyes all the time. Like, they don't have a guy to write the spirit of the age. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, no, definitely.
They're missing a little of that. Dave Brock is still wanting to gun for that. They are the science fiction band, and he knows that, and they're just pushing for that. But, I mean, they're influenced very much by what's going on at the time. In 1995, I really liked the X-Files.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, I eventually got annoyed with it because, like, all the alien plotline episodes just seemed to be, like, just making up random stuff and throwing it at the wall and not resolving anything. Whereas the Monster of the Week episodes were pretty good. I don't know what this show's going for, but whatever, it's good. Blue Skin, awesome too. Beam Me Up, really like that track. Xenomorph, that's really heavy.
Yeah,
I liked it a lot.
Sputnik Stand and festivals are pretty cool, I think.
Yeah. I don't know. I think this is a strong album. I like Ron Tree's vocals. The thing about Dave Brock fronting Hawkwind, there's occasions where I feel like he struggles to come up with good vocal melodies. Like, I feel sometimes, like, the vocal melodies are kind of same-ish, and they're not really pushing as much as they could. So I kind of do feel like when there's another vocalist in the band, I feel like maybe I like that better. And so Ron Tree coming in here and doing the lead vocals, yeah, I like it. I think it fits. His voice has this, like, mournfulness to it that I dig. It feels good. Alien I Am, it's just such a captivating vocal part. Like, it just, I don't know. Hawkwind is not known for that, you know? I mean, it's been a long time since I've been able to say, hey, man, those vocals are really good, right? Like, this is like, you know, it's just not something, you know, we're talking about Space Bandits. I'm like, yeah, there's a woman in the band now, but, like, I'd be hard-pressed to really say anything else about her vocal performance, you know what I mean? Then we get here, and it's like, yeah, this guy's taken over vocals, and it's good, it fits. And he's able to convey a mournfulness and a passion that I like a lot, so I feel like this is a transition album a little bit, maybe.
It definitely is, yeah.
Yeah, although they would get more sporadic with releasing albums after this point for a while. But since 2010, they've been pretty busy, actually, again. And they do have a few albums between this and then. But we're not talking about the post-2010 albums so much. I might mention a couple that I've actually listened to at the end of the episode. But, like, in general, yeah, it's just, we're getting to the point where the stuff is less familiar. But this is the one where I'm like, you know what? This album I listened to at the right time. It hit me. I really sunk into its atmosphere. There's stuff like the first track, Abducted, and, like, Reject Emotions and stuff like that, where there's a lot of, like, ambience, and I guess it's supposed to be, like, being taken up into the flying saucer kind of thing and all that. Like, I don't know. It works. I like it. I like it more than the attempts at doing electronic music from the early 80s. I just think now it's so easy to create ambience on a synthesizer and, you know, or with samplers and programming and stuff like that, that now they're really mastering it. And Dave Brock can probably do this at home on his computer, right?
I'm sure that's what he is doing, yeah.
Sometimes you could say, hey, that's not great. That's like the democratization of music in a bad way. So, like, so many people can just create bad electronic music on a computer without, like, the need to put in too many resources and stuff like that. And I've heard that argument. That's fine. But, like, yeah, eventually you gotta be like, well, you're going to be able to find some real gems if you look through music done in this time period, because like there's so much room for people to express their creativity, maybe if they couldn't before. I mean, it's hard to form a band. It's hard to have chemistry with other guys, especially if you're a weird, eccentric artist type.
Yeah.
Now, Hawkwind are still a band at this point. They're still touring. They're still doing stuff. Yeah, I did mention Sputnik Stan. That's a really awesome track, too.
Yeah, Sputnik Stan and festivals are a couple of ones that I like,
Yeah, I don't know. I enjoyed this one a lot. This is one of my favorite post-80s albums. Absolutely.
Cool.
I would recommend this if people are wanting to get into newer Hawkwind, I think.
Well, after this one, we get more chaos and lineup changes. So Jerry Richards is brought in on second guitar, and Alan Davey more or less storms out because he didn't really like the increasing direction of electronics in the band and probably got offended that another guitar player was being added. So, and more lineup changes and chaos. And I don't know, how far did you listen? I listened to Distant Horizon.
I didn't actually listen to that one either.
Okay.
Apparently it's pretty good.
I wasn't really a big fan of it, actually. That was by far my least favorite of the records we listened to. But yeah, I guess that brings us to the end of the records that we both listened to then.
Yeah, I've listened to a couple later albums. I've listened to Take Me to Your Leader and Blood of the Earth. One's from 2005, one's from 2010. And I will say I enjoyed both those albums quite a bit. Interestingly, it does seem like their last several albums, there might be a few winners in that bunch. I haven't listened to any of those yet.
Yeah, I actually just listened to the new record this weekend in between when we recorded the first segment and now. Yeah. And I liked it. Yeah, it's really cool. I definitely want to listen to it more. And first listen was very, very positive. So check it out.
Yeah, it's interesting because it is very rare to find older rock bands even making interesting music, like, you know, in any sense. I mean, I guess it's all relative. Some people definitely are interested in what the old bands are doing still. And I'm just thinking, like, a band like Fleetwood Mac. Does anybody care about anything they've released in the last 30 years, right? Yeah. They're still going.
Yeah.
But, like, Deep Purple's later albums definitely have their fans. They have a new guitarist now. Apparently, the last Deep Purple album is really good. I haven't heard that, but I might end up listening to it at some point, right? Even though I haven't listened, the last full album that I listened to was actually Perfect Stranger. No, Perpendicular from sometime in the 90s. But I don't know. The last Sabbath album with Dio wasn't too bad. I didn't like the production, but it was fine.
Do you mean Dehumanizer or Heaven and Hell?
Heaven and Hell.
Yeah, yeah. Those are cool. I saw them on that tour. That was definitely a lot of fun. Yeah.
Yeah. It was a great tour. I'm not that into the album just because I don't like the way it sounds. I don't know. There's something about it's that whole like loudness war thing. It's just, I don't know. Yeah. It's got some good songs on it though.
Yeah.
I didn't like 13 at all.
No.
It's horrible. It's just like, I don't even.
Yeah. I don't know. The amount of bands like in any genre of music that have these massive discographies where I can recommend huge chunks and still be like, yeah, I really like this band to the modern day. It's very, very few and far between.
I think it's too, like, Hawkwind has always kept this DIY spirit a little bit. Right. And they always were, though, like, we're going to put on this huge stage show, even if it's going to make us broke. Like, we're going to do it, right?
Yeah.
It's like they don't tell everybody that it's going to make them broke, but they know. I'm sure Dave Brock knows in the back of his mind, yeah, we're probably going to lose money on this, right? It's like, maybe it's not so elaborate nowadays.
No, I can't imagine. So, I mean, Dave Brock is in his 80s. I believe he is 83 at the moment, as we're recording this.
Incredible.
Born on August 20th, 1941.
Oh, man.
So, yeah, pretty incredible that he's still going and still releasing really cool music. So
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That makes him one of the oldest classic rock, prog, whatever bands still going, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah, definitely.
All the drama and different things he could have closed up so many times over the years, just said enough's enough, right? He just decided to keep it going. So and people really love some of that later material. So yeah, I'm interested anyway. This has been a really interesting journey, all told. I think we all have a preference for certain eras, you know, the 70s stuff. I mean, I think most people would say the same thing. And I did watch a bunch of ranking videos and stuff like that before doing this, and it did seem like for the vast majority of people, it's a like 72 to 75 period that's like their favorite, right?
Yep.
I don't know. I guess it's a little bit predictable that I think it is that way for both of us as well. But I mean, I really like some of the other eras, especially the Bob Calvert fronted era. I like a lot. I like the 76 to 79 period.
Yeah.
Is just, to me, almost as good.
Yeah, I like that stuff. It's great. And it's cool that they're able to change up their sound so much. And it's cool that they're able to still make good music that's innovative and engaging and catchy and heavy at times and light at times. And overall, just like a lot of fun to listen.
Yeah. Wow, quite a journey. Quite a journey.
Yeah.
I don't know if we have any other anecdotes to share. I did check out some of the other side things that we didn't really talk about. Like, one that I really was getting into was the Pink Fairies. Really enjoying a bunch of their albums, actually. Like, What a Bunch of Sweeties, the first Pink Fairies album with tracks like Do It. Just really, really great raw rock and roll. If you like stuff like, I don't know, the Stooges and MC5 and stuff like that, you should really listen to those. And yeah, of course, most of the On Parole lineup was from that band. And of course, Paul Rudolph, who joined Hawkwind for a good period of time there and played some really awesome bass guitar, was also in that band. So something that I really started listening to a lot more when we were getting ready to do this, because they were mentioned a lot in one of the books we were reading. So, and I'd listened to them a little bit before. I remembered they did a cover of The Ventures' Walk Don't Run on What a Bunch of Sweeties. And I was like, it's a really just awesome way to do that song in this like 9-minute pounding, like screaming guitar kind of version, right? That's the original is pretty cool. And if you like that kind of like Western sounding surf rock sort of stuff, right? I don't know. They covered a couple of Beatles songs. Yeah, of course, knowing that it was associated with Lemmy. The Days of the Underground book also mentions a lot of ties, not just ties, but like associations with other bands that maybe didn't know them or didn't share members, but which stuff like the crowd rock bands that I believe it was Nick Turner, perhaps, who said he enjoyed Can as well. Noid definitely got a bunch of mentions.
Yeah.
Yeah, I made a playlist of a bunch of cool Hawkwind-related kind of stuff, and I had a good time listening to some of that, preparing for these too, as well as listening to the Hawkwind albums, of course. Skipping two that you listen to, unfortunately, but yeah.
Yeah, there's always more stuff to check out, both the studio albums and the live albums.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just want to read a couple quotes about some interesting reflections on the band and how they related to other stuff was going on that just like really jumped out at me. So in an interview with Moorcock regarding the rise of punk, the interviewer asked him, "How do you think Hawkwind and the rise of punk were connected?" And Moorcock responds saying, quote, "Closely. We were essentially an urban band with urban lyrics, and so were the punks. We all had that in common. That's why the Pistols, Susie, and others so liked Hawkwind. I was made very welcome at punk gigs. Susie liked Lemmy mostly, but was enthusiastic when she heard I'd worked with Hawkwind. I liked her a lot. Classy lady." And then Richard H. Kirk of Cabaret Voltaire says, quote, "The concerts I went to in the mid-70s were just amazing. One of them was on the Adam Henge tour, and it was truly psychedelic. I just remember the stage looked like it was melting at one point because of the way they'd done the films. I was thinking, whatever I've taken, it's stronger than I thought." And then the last one that I want to read is a very, very brief quote from Nick Turner. And Nick says, after receiving a huge electric shock at a show, quote, "After that little affair, I liked electricity. I remember one day I was fixing a light socket in my house, and I accidentally stuck my fingers in the hole. It felt great."
Ah, yes.
So yeah, that's Hawkwind.
Electric Tripper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this has been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of really awesome albums that I was just unfamiliar with before this, and I've always wanted to listen to later Hawkwind, and now I've been about halfway there, because they still have a whole bunch of albums that I haven't yet got to. But yeah, doing this was a lot of fun. I think it was a lot of relevant stuff that come up on Chrononauts before and in the future, and maybe we'll do another music-related episode in the future when we decide to do one of these bonuses.
you can use a band like this to create your episode themes sometimes, right?
Yeah.
There's so many different things. I'm thinking about Iron Maiden too, and how it's so funny that like they were supposedly, I guess, shunned by the authorities in the early '80s. Maybe it's exaggerated a little bit, but the point where it's like, oh, that band is satanic and evil. Meanwhile, they're singing about all these like works of literature and
Yeah, right.
genre and non-genre and history,
yeah.
and I could learn more from Iron Maiden than I could from my schooling, right? Like, technically, a lot of people probably said that. You know what I mean? So it's like, they should have been grateful that these bands were trying to get people to be interested in stuff, right?
Yeah, well, I guess Eddie stabbing Margaret Thatcher on the cover of the single there rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, but...
Yeah. I don't know. I'm trying to say that Hawkwind is educational and beneficial. I think the straight world would not see it that way. Definitely. The funny thing about them, I feel like they were always on the cusp of this, like, being dangerous a little bit and being, like, not quite normal, right?
Yeah.
Only the freaks like music like this, right? And that's part of the thing that makes them cool, right? But it's just like, yeah, they in a way, a band like Iron Maiden is especially after Paul Di'Anno left, like, they're more straight. They're more like sober and not that threatening compared to Hawkwind, almost, in a way, right? They feel like they're part of the underground wave and part of the counterculture and like going against the straight and narrow, right? But yeah, I enjoy this a lot, and hopefully some people enjoyed listening to this. It was a great chance to talk about these. We had a bunch of laughs because there's so many wicked stories and stuff. And
yeah, and if you made it this far, thank you for listening. It's definitely been an amazing journey. I'm sure we could put together a reading list of science fiction novels and stories that are attached to Hawkwind if we wanted to. There's no shortage of stuff we could have read for this. I mean, we talked about Black Corridor, but that's like one of many, many, many novels
indeed
we could have talked about. And I'm sure if we cover any of those novels in the future, we'll be sure to mention the Hawkwind ties.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll be doing Lord of Light at some point.
Yeah. That'll be a lot of fun and interesting discussion, for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll be back with our regularly scheduled programming with Gretchen in probably a couple weeks. So stay tuned for when we talk about some interesting authors that we haven't yet brought on the podcast, because I think that's going to be another really fun and interesting discussion.
But in the meantime, you know what to do if there's a sonic attack on your district. To use your wheels. If you are making love, all bodies must come to orgasm simultaneously to avoid sonic destruction. You know, but you will not panic. Think only of yourself. Think only of yourself. And board your spaceships and blast into the void. Be ready for the signal. It will come. You will hear it in the dark. The stars beckon. We are chrononauts. Good night.